The story begins with the wedding of two young people taking place one day, but she was not as ordinary as she might at first appear. It seemed like it was business as usual. A beautiful bride in a white dress, and everything around her incredibly fabulous. Everything looks like it's an unquestionably flawless Duke's wedding. However, you can see hatred and contempt in the gazes of the guests. No one was hiding the fact that everyone was against this wedding. There wasn't a single guest who was genuinely excited about the event. And because of that, it was hard to ignore such attention and enjoy the beautiful event. The priest began to speak his words. They sounded beautiful, of course, but they made no sense. Because unfortunately, or fortunately, everything he said won't come true. It will not work out to create a happy and good family, as it usually happens after marriage. Because on this day, a girl will marry that man who wants to destroy her because of hatred and many other reasons. Like all misfortunes, it came to the girl quite unexpectedly, and perhaps even undeservedly. In her real life, she was an ordinary girl who was unhappy. And at some point, a situation occurred that would completely change her future. She was a young and beautiful lady, and had done nothing wrong to anyone, but at some point in time, a terrible thing happened. But it turned out it wasn't the end. From that moment on, she was destined. A whole new life, a new destiny and appearance. When she looked at herself in the mirror, the girl didn't realize who she saw there. She had black hair and a completely different appearance. Of course, it is obvious that a rebirth into another body has occurred. It was a scenario she had often seen before in books. The girl she was reborn into, and who she is now, her name is Edith. It turns out that she was trapped in the book she read last night, and is in the body of a girl who was beautiful and bright, the bastard daughter of an earl. In the book, her name was Lissy Sinclair. Because of her background, she was persecuted by her family and had an unhappy childhood. Then she caught the attention of the Dukes and went to live with them. A fierce competition without any concessions for the girl's attention, and this is where the obsession described in the title of the book begins. Edith's role in this novel is that she is simple, stupid, and greedy, and also a jealous and evil villain who is constantly trying to do bad things to the very Lissy Sinclair she hated. She took every opportunity to bring her down or do her some kind of mischief. It was the only thing she wanted. After all, she hated her because she felt she wasn't as beautiful as Lissy Sinclair. The girl had already been tidied up by stylists and makeup artists, so she was ready to fulfill all her plans, and immediately set out to correct her fate, in order to stay alive and live a happy life. Initially, it was necessary to right all the wrongs of the villainess whose body she was now in, one of several important things she wanted to accomplish, mending her relationship with her family, and winning their love. The girl was in a great mood, so she thought it would be easy to make up with her father in one conversation. But she was wrong. She went into his room and told him, "Good morning," and tried to be nice and polite to him. Except she imagined it much easier, and forgot that it's actually not that easy to establish a relationship with someone she hasn't talked to in a long time, and has been in conflict for a long time. Edith immediately noticed that after she entered the room, her father's mood immediately disappeared, and he was aggressive. It wasn't surprising, though. After all, this was how they'd talked to each other before, and it was silly to expect a different reaction from him. So it was not pleasant for her to hear that after she tried to talk to him normally and make up with him, and when she experienced a father's relationship with his daughter and being in her body, only then did she realize how hard it would be to fix things. She began to fear literally every look and word he said, because the only thing Edith was afraid of was that soon she would have to pay for growing up in this house, and enjoying all the comforts, and being accepted into this family. When she was a little girl, the girl had no idea that she would end up in a family where she was treated badly and not loved, much less that she should be grateful for it. This was absolutely not the family she wanted to spend her childhood in, but she had no other choice. They tried to scold her for absolutely everything, even if it was unjustified. She was punished even for no reason. Every time she was in a desperate situation where she was locked in a room for some mistake or other, it was like they were trying to find a reason to punish her or make her look guilty, even when they weren't. When Edith went out to people on the street, she always looked gorgeous and was like an advertisement for this family. And in fact, at home, she was taking out her anger on her and being treated very badly. Only that no one saw it and didn't know what was really going on in that family in relation to the girl. She was very tired of it and longed to finally know what a happy life was, when you cannot expect any criticism or aggression from the outside without reason, and feel free wherever she is. One day there was some strange situation, which did not surprise her anymore, because she was used to it long ago. Her father called out to her very loudly, and ordered her to come to him immediately. Turns out he once again didn't like her behavior, though he never said anything specific. He was also talking about how the girl had no right to make a single mistake today. There are some negotiations waiting for her, where she has to say she'll take some 3 maids with her. And if she does, she can move on to the next stage. Just what that means is still unclear. Because everyone at home yells at her and hates her, she is very rarely in a good mood and can't even find the energy to smile at anyone. One day she decided to analyze all the information she remembers about this family. Duke Ludwig and Count Triegelhoff have been rivals since their childhood. The two families used to be about on the same level, but at one point Duke Ludwig's family made a big contribution, hence the title of dukes. It is after this that Count Triegelhoff thinks that the title of duke has been brazenly stolen from him, and Duke Ludwig has received it undeservedly. That's why he wants to marry Edith off, so she can find information that will help destroy the reputation of Duke Ludwig's family. The situation was very difficult, and she really didn't like the fact that she had to fulfill someone else's plan that she didn't need or care about. So she needs to escape her fate and finally start living the life she dreams of. The day had come when they must all come together to visit Duke Ludwig, and it was one of the most responsible days in recent memory. Edith could not understand why she was obliged to help this man, her father, if he treated her so terribly. Just because they welcomed her into their family doesn't mean they have the right to treat her so badly. After all, it was their decision, and now she has to pay for something and be grateful. It was time to approach the mansion, and in the meantime they were taking in all the sights around them. And there was no denying that it was really beautiful and well-maintained. After a while they were met by the butler and told that the Duke and Duchess were waiting for them inside. He then offered to guide them and asked them to follow him. Another proof has just occurred that, in the presence of other people, the father treats Edith hypocritically, as if he loved her very much. But the girl realized that he was just trying to appear to be something he wasn't, showing a good relationship with his daughter. It was unusual for her to see her father in a good mood, though she realized it was just an act that wouldn't last long. As she stood there, she couldn't believe she was seeing these characters live, and now she was standing in front of them. They were greeted by their hosts and invited to sit down, as it wouldn't be long before the food arrived and the meal could begin. Edith was looking at all the people present at this time, and noticed that they were incredibly handsome, such as this guy, or this girl, who is the same Lissy that the villain hates because of her incredible beauty. And it turns out the man who was sitting next to that beautiful woman is Edith's future husband. When she saw him, she felt a special energy emanating from him. And it's as if it's immediately clear that this man is capable of some very bad things that the girl wants to avoid, and not let anything like that happen. Even judging by his appearance, it is clear what kind of person he is. His facial features and his gaze speak about it. When you look at it, you get the impression that it was better not to have done it. And the mere sight of him makes you a little scared, especially when he's not in the mood. So one had to calm down, because nothing bad had happened so far. And you should also try to give the impression of a nice girl who doesn't suspect anything. Meanwhile, the food had already arrived and everyone was invited to the table. You could see that the hosts had taken care of it and everything looked beautiful. Edith wanted to try everything because absolutely every dish was incredibly delicious, and it wasn't impossible to stop. Meanwhile, a conversation had begun about Edith moving into the mansion soon, and wanting to take her own maids with her. But the owners didn't quite understand what it was for, and told of their maids being the best, and they would be as good as any other. You don't even have to doubt it, and you don't even have to worry about their professionalism. Except that the girl's father was so worried that he completely failed to notice how insistent he was in his request, and it looked a little uncultured from the outside. They tried to politely refuse him, but he kept persuading them that he was right, and it was best not to argue with him. This behavior seemed a little strange to those around him. After all, no one expected him to behave this way when he was a guest. So the girl decided to remedy the situation a bit and take matters into her own hands. She said that there was no need to take her father's words seriously, as he feels strongly about his daughter getting married and wants her to be happy. And from that moment the conflict began. The man could not stand the fact that they tried to correct him and settle the situation, and didn't even pay attention to the fact that the girl was only trying to do what was best. But once again he wouldn't even listen to her and started yelling at her anyway, even though he was actually wrong. But he tried to defend his opinion and show that only he had the right to decide something in this situation. Edith began to realize that they would create more problems with this behavior, and maybe they would just get kicked out after this. That's why you need to fix things as soon as possible, because they certainly don't deserve anything good with this behavior. She tried to convince her father that she knew what she was doing, and just asked him to trust her. A week later, she showed up for her own wedding and wondered what she was up to, whether to do her father's bidding, or to start living the life she wanted, and finally feel free. She realized it would be over after they exchanged rings. And this was the most important moment she had been waiting for, because there was no father around to control her, and she could do whatever she wanted. At one point she looked at her fiancé and wished for just a second that he would start being nice. Even though she knew it was impossible, she still kept hoping for it. She understood him, for it was very hard for a man like him to smile and be happy when someone was looking at him. So it had to be done quickly, and after that it would be over. But this moment was not without a strange situation. When it came time to put each other's rings on, the groom was able to do it for her. Except what happened next is really impressive. Because he doesn't like someone touching him, an unexpected situation occurred. He took his ring on his own. He didn't let her take it, even though she was supposed to do that. And he decided to put a ring on his own instead. She did not understand this act, for was it really so distasteful to him if she had done this action? Such an act offended her greatly, for she had not expected that he could ruin everything at such a moment. And such a thing she will definitely remember for a long time, because it is impossible to forget and forgive. In spite of what had happened, Edith didn't so much, and got upset because she didn't want this wedding and a good relationship between them anyway. So it was necessary to just try to ignore such attention, because in this situation it was completely unimportant to her. In that moment, she realized the kind of man she would have to live with, and what he was really like. Until that moment, she couldn't even imagine him being so rude. And he doesn't think he's doing anything to offend her. A life where she would enjoy every day, not worry about being hit or hurt by anyone. That's exactly what she dreamed of. And from then on, she will be able to be completely safe and enjoy the comfort she will get in her new home. It was unusual for her in the beginning to feel like a free and happy person. And when she realized that now it would always be like this, she was very happy about it every time. Suddenly someone knocked on the door and asked if they could come into her room. It turned out to be Lady Lissy Sinclair. Edith immediately asked how she could help her. This pretty girl had come to tell Edith something, and at first sight it seemed as if she were a little frightened or wanted to tell something bad. At this point, Edith remembers that she remembers such a moment in the book, and since she was the villain, she needed to maintain that image. After the marriage ceremony, Lizzie went to Edith's house to apologize for Callan's rudeness. However, her apology had the opposite effect, and made Edith very angry, as she couldn't blame her fiancé for his behavior, so she decided to vent all her anger on Lissy. At this point, she immediately started yelling at her and asking her how she even dared to wear a white dress to someone else's wedding. At least it was a really good reason for her to yell, because Lissy had really done the wrong thing by wearing a white dress to the wedding, didn't even have to think of anything. Despite the fact that Edith yelled at the girl, Lissy kept apologizing for Callan's rudeness, and said that despite what he appears to be at first glance, he is actually a very kind and good person. Edith was actually embarrassed for yelling at her, for how could anyone be angry with such a nice girl? But despite that, she still tried to stick to her villainous image towards Lissy. Except it didn't always work out, because she had just started sticking to the image, and sometimes it was almost impossible. After all, she's not angry enough to express aggression at someone who is not guilty of anything. She realizes how unpleasant it is from her own experience. So she has made the decision that she only has the right to be angry at those who deserve it. And because she made the decision that she had the right to communicate normally with this girl, she immediately felt better and more comfortable talking to her, and one could relax and not pretend to be something she wasn't. But she could only afford such things with people who were really good and had nothing against Edith. At one point, Lissy realizes that she has taken too much of Edith's time, and immediately apologized to her for it. But Edith said there was nothing wrong with it, so it was okay. After that, they said their goodbyes and it was time to rest after a hard day. The girl knew exactly what she needed. So without a second thought, she arranged a perfect evening of relaxation. She only dreamed of taking a bath as soon as possible. Every time she relaxed and enjoyed her comfort, she was very grateful for such a fate and for the fact that she could now live a happy and safe life. After all, nothing is required of her now, and she can do anything she wants. It's what she's dreamed of all her life. And when it all came to fruition, she couldn't believe it was actually happening. As suddenly her husband comes in and says something nice for the first time, namely that she's looking pretty good right now. She hadn't expected that, since the story said he wasn't supposed to be stopping by her place right now. So because of the surprise, I got very embarrassed and didn't know what to answer him. and I told him that I hadn't expected him to show up. To this he said, "Have I no right to go into my wife's room? After all, she is not a stranger to him, and he has the right to do whatever he wants, especially since he is in his own home." Edith couldn't even imagine him wanting to talk to her after refusing her touch during the wedding, but he certainly couldn't justify his act. When he was mad at her, she couldn't stop thinking about how handsome he was, even when he was in no mood. Besides, she didn't have the strength or desire to answer him exactly as he did, with anger and rudeness. Afterward he asked, "Is she really going to sleep in this room?" Though it sounded a little weird, like she had to sleep somewhere else so he couldn't see her. After he left, the girl couldn't understand what he had even come for. Callan didn't explain anything, and just silently walked away unexplained. On the way he was met by Lissy, and asked why he wasn't with his wife right now. He knew full well that Lissy was asking this to possibly help their relationship and do something good for them, so he told her everything, as he trusts her, and has no doubts about telling her everything. Callan said during the conversation that Lissy has one problem. She always thinks well of people and doesn't see anything wrong with them, even when it's obvious. And what other people immediately notice, she may not see, and think that in fact all people are good. Guy tried to explain it all to her so she wouldn't think too well of Edith. Afterward, Lissy told how Edith yelled at her for wearing a white dress to her wedding. And of course, he was on Lissy's side in this situation, as they've been socializing and trusting each other for a long time. It was evident that he was dead set against his wife, and never missed an opportunity to accuse her of something. For example, for the dress she wore to their wedding. Turns out he didn't like the dress or the bride. But still, Lissy tried to say that he shouldn't talk about his girlfriend like that. After all, she hadn't done anything bad to him. Lissy doesn't understand where he gets such hatred for his own wife and how he can say such things about her. Even though she respected Callan, she still stood her ground and wouldn't change her mind. That was very right of her. At one point he says that she, of all people, should understand how he's feeling right now. Just what that could mean is still unclear. Suddenly they hear someone coming toward them. Perhaps it was his brother, and he wondered why the two of them were standing here alone and not resting. Lissy said hello to him and told him that it was really time to go to bed. Except it looked like Callan wasn't exactly happy to see him and wanted to talk to Lissy about something. The next morning came, and for the first time in a long time Edith felt that she had slept well and felt fine. It was strange to her that in such a short time she was able to get enough sleep, and woke up early enough without an alarm clock. After all, she used to be able to sleep for hours and still feel tired as a result. Her good condition must have been influenced by her calm and stress-free life. Edith remembered that she had important business to attend to. She must mend relations with her husband's parents, and consolidate her success with them. She remembers that they treated her well initially, but there is a need to maintain a mutual understanding between them, and preferably as soon as possible so they realize how important it is for her to be on good terms with them, and she is willing to do something about it. Plus, she realizes that it's far more important to listen to the Duke and Duchess than to their son. Therefore, if a girl wants to stay here for a long time, first of all it is necessary to communicate well and maintain mutual understanding with these people. If she lives quietly and peacefully with them, she can enjoy the comforts and conveniences of a luxurious life for a long time. So one must gain their trust, and to do so, she decided to greet them first thing in the morning. Plus, she won't have to cook or clean anything in the mansion because there are maids for that, and all she has to do is pretend to be a nice daughter-in-law. But first she must tidy herself up, and in this she asked the maid for help. She realized that she absolutely did not have to work hard or do anything, so being a good daughter-in-law was too easy. The main thing is not to quarrel with the hosts, and to look dignified in their presence. Edith thought for a long time about which dress she should wear after all. Some of them were too inappropriate, and it was a good thing she realized that, because over just one dress you could ruin everything without starting a conversation. Since she realized that she had to be careful about this choice, she asked her assistant to pick out the most appropriate dress. Edith was surprised that the assistant was too indifferent and kind of strange, because after the conversation just silently turned around and walked away. But the girl tried not to pay attention to it. Just as suddenly, she realizes that she forgot about one very important point yesterday. Last night was the exact night she and her husband were supposed to be together. But since he had left, Edith decided it was his own fault, and she had done nothing wrong. It is known that the plot of the book stated that Callan was in love with Lissy, but she didn't know it. Now I can see why he was unhappy yesterday when someone interrupted their conversation. Only that's what Callan was there for yesterday. If he didn't care about his wife and he doesn't love her, It was very strange of him because he never explained anything. Anyway, she didn't mind seeing his handsome face again. When she was thinking about it all, she didn't notice the time had passed, and the assistant had prepared her outfit and done her hair. The most important moment has arrived. It's time to welcome the Duke and Duchess and ask how they're doing. The girl wanted to maximize her good impression in their eyes. Callan's parents noticed that the girl was too nervous and said she had nothing to worry about. She was very pleased that they cared enough to make her a cup of tea. Also, Edith wanted to know if they knew that their son had slept in the other room tonight and hadn't even stayed with her. At one point, his parents started a conversation about whether she knew at least some of the duties of a mistress of an aristocratic household, and it was good that the girl remembered some memories from the book and could easily answer that question. She said she knows how to manage cash flow and organize documents, so if they have a system like that, she can figure it out and will take it on as soon as possible. After such a question, Edith realized that these people did not fully trust her, and the Duke asked that to see if she was here to pick up some documents for herself. So she replied if she didn't deserve their trust, they could teach her something else, and she would gladly do it to be useful. The Duke and Duchess were surprised, and they enjoyed talking to such a well-mannered girl who understands everything. The Duchess even complimented her upbringing and manners, then asked for help after 2 weeks. Edith, of course, agreed, and asked for an assistant to be assigned to her, if possible. It was so she could find out what kind of man he was and why he left his wife the night after the wedding. It was time to say goodbye, and the girl said she had to go. When she left the room, she was relieved because she was so worried and afraid to say the wrong thing. Some assistant came up to her and asked if she was okay, to which she said she was just a little nervous. Turns out to be the Duchess's assistant who just needs to give a tour of the mansion. They met and greeted each other. This is the person in charge of the paperwork, and for some reason he's not mentioned in the book, and neither is the maid. And because she didn't know anything about them, she was a little uncomfortable, because she didn't know what to expect from them. But since they haven't done anything wrong yet, they don't arouse any suspicion. The girl tried to communicate well with them, and did not pretend to be a little afraid of their presence, for perhaps they were against Edith, and were not quite what they might seem at first sight. So they need to be checked out and trusted. First place they go is the jewelry vault, where absolutely every piece of the Duke and Duchess's jewelry is kept. And they also went to a huge library with a collection of very rare books. This place is really impressive, and when they went there, it felt like it had a special atmosphere. So Edith decided to ask if she could go there anytime she wanted, or if she needed someone's permission. It turns out that anyone in the family can go in there at any time. The same goes for the artwork. That was really good news. After the library, they went to the art room. This room was special, and felt like there was an incredible atmosphere there as well. It would take a very long time to see everything, and it would be impossible to stop looking at a work of art. At which point the butler says we can call it a night. The girl thanked for the tour, because it was really impressive and very beautiful. She didn't even notice the time had passed. Plus, it was really nice to hear him say something. It was like he had spent his whole life practicing to talk beautifully about something. But he wasn't used to being able to be thanked and praised by anyone. So he just said he was doing his job, and he could show the rest another day. But as they still had time on the way back, he told of the place by which they would be traveling. It's usually used for tea parties because it's the perfect place for it. And when the Duke and Duchess have guests over, they're usually there to greet the guests and talk about something. Plus, it's very beautiful and nice to be there. Except it looks like the girl wasn't really listening to the information, and was looking somewhere else at the time. The butler notices he's not being listened to at all, and doesn't understand why. Edith stopped and started looking somewhere. She must have been interested in something, or seen something interesting. Turns out she saw her husband in the company of Lissy, so she stopped to look at it. It was an unpleasant situation for her, because instead of being with her, he's spending time with some other girl. But since Edith wasn't really in love with him, it wasn't so hard and hurtful for her to see it. But it was still frustrating to see her husband socializing with someone without even once coming to see his wife to see how she was doing. It's amazing that he sometimes smiles in the company of other people. For example, with Edith he is constantly rude and wants to go somewhere all the time. But that must be totally unimportant to her, because the only thing she wants is to simply enjoy all the comforts and privileges of the mansion she lives in. So she continued talking to the butler as if nothing had happened. She decided to change the subject to how beautiful the weather was outside. The butler said he had a lot to do, so the girl said she wouldn't keep him busy anymore. He's already given her enough time and shown her a lot of interesting things. After the tour, The butler went to his master to tell him how it had gone. He tried to give as much detail as possible as to how the girl behaved and what she was interested in. During the excursion of the Duke asked if anything strange was going on. The butler said it was nothing of the sort, and the girl had behaved with great dignity, and also remembered that there was only one situation on the way back down the corridor. He told how Lady had witnessed her husband and another guy having tea with Lissy. This information surprised Callan's father a little bit because he didn't expect his son to do something like this. He told him to behave himself, and said it must have been very unpleasant to see her husband flirting with another woman the morning after the wedding. Except that she was acting really weird, and she didn't show it at all, that his behavior might have upset her in some way. His father didn't expect this behavior from his son, and didn't know what to do about it, and I also didn't understand why the girl wasn't upset at all. Although maybe she just didn't want to cause a scandal. Butler added that her behavior seemed ambiguous. Over time, everyone began to notice it. In the meantime, the girl had gone to lunch, but there was something unusual for her. Is that she has someone cleaning up after her all the time, and she doesn't have to do it. Edith, in turn, tried to make the assistants' work easier somehow, and offered sometimes to go away for a rest or lunch, because she saw how tired they were getting. Perhaps it was because Edith was uncomfortable having someone else do some of the work for her, and she wasn't used to that kind of life. She'll probably get used to it, though, and she won't think it's weird anymore that someone will clean up after her or bring something for her. During lunch, she realizes what's left is to build a relationship with Lissy. Lissy, the girl who is destined to become the main character, against all odds, before she came to the Ludwig family. Her life was not easy. Her brother and sister were constantly trying to humiliate her. Her life was really difficult, filled with stress and bad attitudes towards her. Then somehow the girl attracted the attention of Duchess Ludwig. The Duke and Duchess were outraged at the mistreatment towards this sweet little girl, so they insisted that the girl start living with them from that point forward. Her parents agreed to it, but they'll regret it later, because they've lost the chance to be related to the Dukes. If you pay attention to the plot of the book, the result is that there isn't a single person left unhappy, except that Andy was the exception. The girl had a lot of trouble in her life from start to finish. At the company where she worked when she was in her present life, she was often treated badly by senior staff. And one day after work, Edith saw her boyfriend walking to the hotel with some other girl, and she never spoke to him again. The same day Edith was walking down the street and thinking of how she would start home to read some book about romance, and it would last a very long time, when suddenly a terrible thing happened. She fell down the stairs, and I wondered what her brother did after he pushed her, and she died. And whether her parents were sad, she very much doubted it, because she knew they probably cared more about her big brother than she did after what happened. But now she had to take care of her own destiny and mend her relationship with Lizzie, whom she'd seen through the window, watching her sit by a tree and read a book. Edith decided that instead of being sad about the past, she needed to make sure that the future would be much better. Except she didn't expect to see her husband walk up to Lizzie to ask how she was doing. This time his behavior was already abnormal, and looked disrespectful to his wife, who at this point is looking at him and seeing everything. It's amazing that he can only smile when he talks to Lissy. With everyone else he shows no emotion, and is almost never in a good mood. Of course it offends his wife to see him socializing with someone in a good mood while he is never nice to her. But there's nothing you can do about his character and his actions, because he does what's written in the script, and you can't fix him. It's gotten to the point where he's being reprimanded for not talking to his wife, for not talking to Andy, and that's wrong. At one point she overhears Callan being directly asked why he doesn't try to talk and spend time with his wife. And Andy realized that she wasn't the only one who'd noticed how he'd slowly started to forget about her and turn his attention to another girl, when suddenly a cup breaks and there's some kind of scandal. One girl didn't know what was going on. I don't know if he's crazy or what he's doing all this for. She was shouting about how she could have been chosen among hundreds of other women, or surely there must be someone much better, except which girl she was talking about was still unknown. The girl who says all this, her name is Layla Sinclair. She's the Earl of Sinclair's youngest daughter, and she seems to be unhappy about something. It turns out that she was so nervous and indignant about Edith marrying Callan that she told Damien Sinclair, the Earl of Sinclair's eldest son, about it. She was very angry about what she found out. But that guy said that it seems like someone has a hobby of picking women who are not as high status as them, and it's not surprising at all. And afterward he asked, what was the use of breaking the cup? for it was really unnecessary. Then she decided to see if her brother knew any interesting information about the wedding and their relationship, for she wanted very much to find out all the details, and perhaps interfere with their happy life. Although their life together is hard to call happy, but still the girl decided to find out as much information as possible. Layla wanted to know any information so badly that she wasn't even going to let her brother go until he told her something interesting. And it's like she's convinced that there's something he's not telling her, and there's something he's not telling her, and there's something she can't know. Layla asked that there be no stalling, and in order to get everyone out sooner, he could start telling all of the secrets, but he tried to calm her down and slowly started talking. To begin with, he asked them to think for what reason and for what purpose they were married, and what benefit there might be to both parties who married their children in doing so. In addition, Count Triegelhoff gets the right to distribute the iron ore that is mined in the mines. In other words, thanks to the wedding of the children, he has the raw materials to produce the necessary products. So it was advantageous for him to marry his daughter to Calixa, and then Layla started to realize what was going on. Although her brother said that it was elementary things that were already clear, and it didn't even need to be guessed, everything was already visible. Except it's going to be a big problem if someone has an agenda that could hurt someone, or if it's more serious than that. After that, Damien told a lot more different information that didn't make any sense to Layla, and she still doesn't understand what this is all for, because it's probably much more serious than that. At one point she got angry and asked why he told her all that, because she didn't understand it anyway. But it turns out her brother did want to explain that the fun was just beginning, and asked her what she thought the catch might be, and what one side was hiding. Things might not be what they really look like, because not many people know what really happened in Edith's family, and how hard it was for her to be in the same house with her father. Everyone saw how easily he yelled at her when they were visiting the first time, but no one paid attention to it, and people thought it was just excitement. No one even thought about the fact that this happens all the time and the girl has to put up with it all the time. Damien has witnessed many times the girl's father constantly yelling at her and putting some conditions on her. It suggests that he wants to do something, and he didn't just order his daughter to marry Killian. He has a hunch that it's more serious than one might think, and one should be wary of what he's up to. All that remains to be done is to watch, and watch Edith's behavior closely. Meanwhile, the Korean went on to give Edith a tour and show her everything she had not had time to see last time, and she gladly agreed to do it, because she really enjoyed learning new things and looking at the incredible beauty in the mansion. I'm surprised it took them a week to see the mansion, and even after all that time, they didn't have time to see everything in it. So the girl asked what to do with the rest of her free time. The butler said it was no longer worth worrying about, because someone had taken care of it in advance. It turns out that the Duchess will give her a job starting today. Edith could not have imagined that it would happen so quickly, and she could start today. The girl was very happy about it, for it had been incredibly hard for her to sit idle all this time, and now she would have some work to do, and Andy would no longer have to think about what she should do, and think of ideas of pastime. So she decided to go to the Duchess to find out all the information she needed and get down to business. But before she did, she asked the butler where her office was, and then she remembered to thank him. For thanks to him, she now had a good grasp of the big mansion. For without him, she would have had a long time to look for the right room. It was unusual for him to be thanked, because usually no one praises him for his work, and he was not used to hearing such things. Plus, in a whole week, it would be weird if the girl didn't remember anything. When Edith walked into the Duchess's office, saw her talking to Lissy. They greeted each other, and Edith was anxious to know what work from this day forward she would do to. And the girl was happy that they would be working together, which is great, because they communicate very well and can help each other out. If they suddenly have any problems, it will be much easier to deal with them together. The Duchess noticed that these girls were conversing well, and were very glad to meet each other. Edith noticed that she had been too absorbed in talking to Lissy, that she had forgotten to say hello to her mistress, and she was ashamed of it. But the Duchess said that the girl could not worry about it, because nothing bad had happened, then asked Lissy to prepare the papers that had been worked on earlier. The girls set about the task, and they both coped well enough with everything. Edith surprisingly even from the first time she understood what was to be done, and made no mistakes. Meanwhile, the Duchess was getting nervous, saying that the time had passed too quickly. Perhaps she was in a hurry or had an important appointment, Lissy decided to tell Edith what it was all about, since she probably hadn't heard anything about it, and she must have missed it for some reason, so she doesn't know what's going on, a situation she remembers in the story, and she remembers what's supposed to happen at that moment. It turned out that the Duchess had new business, and because of this had to postpone all work to tomorrow, so the girls were free, and could go about their business or rest after work. Since I have a lot of important things to do tomorrow, I should have taken advantage of it and gone on vacation, because it happens very rarely, and Edith was very much in luck, for she was released quickly enough to go about her business. She had an unplanned day off, and it was a very good opportunity to spend it the way she wanted to spend it. But it turns out it didn't happen the way they thought it would, and they were asked to help with design choices, so they had to stay and do whatever they were asked to do. Edith was sure that the option that Lissy would suggest would be better, and in any case, the girl thought she was bad at choosing some design. But since she wanted to get out of here and go on vacation, she had to help and do whatever they asked. Except that it was really hard to decide what looked more beautiful and what would be the right choice, because it is very responsible. Edith knew that the girls around her were much better at design, so she was afraid to offer her own suggestion, and she didn't understand why the other girls were so much quicker at picking out designs than Edith. Besides, what Lissy chose, the Duchess was always praising and liking. She was saying that Lissy made a great choice, and that it was a perfect fit. Edith wanted to be as knowledgeable about design and choose the very best designs. It turns out that Lissy chose a dress that matched the skin tone of the Duchess, so the blue dress perfectly emphasized her appearance. It was time to voice her option to Edith, but she could not choose anything, and hesitated for a long time whether to suggest anything. But surprisingly, she did pick one dress, and she was ready to show it off. It becomes more and more interesting to see if the Duchess will like Edith's choice, and how well she was able to do her task. When it came time to show her choice, Edith realized there was no turning back, and she had to choose something anyway. Her version was a little different from what the Duchess was usually used to wearing, and she had less of a chance than the other girls. After all, few people can like this combination of colors. But Edith was sure that this is not a bad version of the outfit, in which the Duchess will definitely be able to surprise everyone and look different from usual. Mistress appreciated the dress, said it was beautiful, but she was afraid it would make her look too bright. Edith was sure that for people who are older, it is necessary to wear fashionable and colorful things in order to always look great and surprise everyone with their images. In any case, the girl did not have the goal of choosing the best dress. She just wanted to fulfill her task, and at the same time not to upset the Duchess. Despite all the worries, the Duchess was very happy with this option, and said that of course she would trust her choice, because it's usually worn by women who are a little younger, and the choice seemed like a compliment to the Duchess. After that, the Duchess proposed to choose some dress that would suit Lissy, not her, and this proposal surprised the girl very much, for she was honored that the Duchess had suggested such a thing to her. The woman from that point on started picking out some dress for the girl herself, and said there were some pretty good options that would suit her just fine. Edith joined this choice. She suggested another option, and said that the color of some of the dress doesn't suit everyone, but Lissy has very light skin and pink cheeks, like strawberry milk, so it will look great on her. During the conversation, the Duchess praised Edith's sense of style, and said that she was perfectly able to choose a dress and image for anyone, and also noted that the girl must have a talent, and the woman did not regret asking her opinion. Edith could not even suspect that she would do her job perfectly, and delight everyone around her with her ability to choose clothes for each girl based on her appearance. So they already had 5 options, and while choosing the best image, they had a good time and talked. It felt like they had improved their relationship a lot thanks to this meeting, and it was very good for Edith. As suddenly the Duchess offers to choose a dress also for Edith, and then apologized that she forgot about the girl, because she also needs to choose a suitable dress. The woman did not understand how she could forget about it, but the girl said that she did not have to choose something, as it is enough to change a little the dresses she already has, in order not to buy some new expensive clothes. And the assistant gladly agreed to adjust a little the clothes that were already in Edith's closet. As she had many dresses that were too inappropriate for meeting respectable people, she had something to fix, for because of this, she could not put them on and wear them to an event or outing. It turns out that one of the main rules of survival of the villain is to completely change her image, so it was necessary to remove all the jewelry, a little rearrangement of small details, and thus it will be possible to create a completely new dress. The assistant said that over time, Edith has noticeably changed her preference in the clothes she wears, because previously the girl was very fond of a lot of rhinestones and jewelry on the dress, and considered the more of them, the better. These changes were noticed by both the Duchess and Lissy. It was surprising to them how much the girl had changed in absolutely everything, and her preferences had changed beyond recognition. After some time, the girls coped with all the tasks they had received earlier, and it turned out that it was not as hard as they had originally imagined. Of course, there is a lot of responsibility in the work, but at the same time this work is very pleasant, and everyone does what he likes to do. At some point, Edith remembered that something could be done with the diamonds that would be removed from her dress. For example, to collect them and sell them. It would be better and more right than they would lie idle or be lost in time. Besides, while talking to everyone, Edith noticed how the Duchess tried to establish relations with the girl. It was very noticeable, and besides, the woman did not hide it, and openly demonstrated it. After Edith was free and about to go to her room to rest, she saw Callan standing near her room, and it was very surprising, for he had not wanted to see Edith or be near her before. He certainly couldn't come for no reason, and maybe this time he had something really serious. Or a miracle happened, and this person changed and decided to apologize for his behavior. She tried to ask what Callan had come for, and what he wanted. In response, he just said to follow him, and not to ask too many questions. Because of this girl, it was a bit strange to agree to his request and go somewhere with him. Because this man had treated her very badly before, and now he was asking her to go out with him. It turned out that all he wanted to say was that Lissy had invited her to a tea party, and the miracle didn't happen, although she had hoped it would happen. But it wasn't really in the story, and maybe he made up an excuse for Edith to go with him. But there's a chance that Lissy did call them to tea, and asked Callan to take Edith so he could spend some time with his wife. But it's not going to help their relationship because Callan's not in the mood to communicate with his wife, and he's not going to do anything about it. Despite the fact that between them a lot of misunderstandings and problems in the relationship, Edith does not stop admiring the appearance of Callan, because in fact he is a real ideal of beauty and looks gorgeous. When they first spoke to each other, not surprisingly, it turned into a conflict, and Callan didn't hide the fact that he didn't want to talk to her at all. The girl doesn't even expect to change her opinion of him during the conversation, and hate him even more after what he dares to say to her. Before they went to tea, he stopped her and decided to say something to her. Namely, to warn her in advance what she should do and what she should not do, and as if he were ordering her to behave better. He said that she should be careful with her words in the presence of Lissy. Did he think that the girl would somehow communicate with her badly and say unpleasant things about her? Maybe he did not know that girls communicate with each other perfectly well, and there will be no conflict. He also hinted that Lissy was a stranger to her, and he wouldn't allow her to be treated badly by his wife. And as strange as it sounds, he really meant it. The girl couldn't even imagine that the first thing he said to her was that she should never dare to hurt Lissy. Edith asked him directly, did he really think she would want to quarrel with anyone, or have a bad relationship with anyone? She had no idea of behaving like that, though she had every right to after the way he treated her. Callan at that moment was a man with whom it was impossible to communicate, and I just wanted to leave, not to hear any more hurtful words from him, because it becomes clear and obvious how much he does not care about his wife, and it is absolutely normal for him to treat her very badly, though she in turn, unlike him, always tried to communicate with him as politely as possible, and did not allow herself what he allows himself to her. Edith certainly does not deserve such a terrible attitude to herself, because she did nothing bad to him. In addition, she has to tolerate his character and pretend as if everything is normal, although it is absolutely not so, and every time she is insanely offended when she sees such a bad attitude, and realizes that nothing cannot be fixed. He likes another girl. She tried to ask him why he was so rude to her, but it was impossible to get a concrete answer out of him. But after many attempts, she said she wouldn't let him treat her like that, and she wasn't the kind of girl who would tolerate it. So she turned and walked away from him in silence, because it was pointless to listen to what he was going to say to her, for there would be nothing good in what he said, and it was foolish to count on it, for he was a man who would never manage it. It was time for tea, and everyone arrived at the table. Callan must have been very surprised to see how well the girls talked to each other, and there was no point in bullying his wife in case she said one bad word to Lissy. All the time they communicated perfectly and easily found common topics for conversation. Between them there was no conflict, and even a hint of bad talk. So Edith's husband was very much mistaken, and surely realizes that in vain insulted his wife, because she was not going to do anything bad. Some guy asked how Edith was adjusting so well to life here at the mansion. She hasn't had a single mistake yet, and she's doing a great job. And also asked if she was taking too little work on her shoulders, because at some point it might get boring and the girl might change her mind about taking on so much responsibility and tasks. Because she is very young, and why she and her husband shouldn't go on a trip after the wedding. Apparently this guy didn't quite understand what kind of relationship they were in, and didn't know that Callan tries to see his wife as little as possible and practically talks to her, so it's not even worth dreaming about. At this point Callan decided to change the subject because he didn't like to talk about Edith. So he asked how about doing things at the mansion as soon as possible, because winter was over, and there was a lot to do. When suddenly this guy asks Lissy if she wants to help him, since she's been saying she wants to go on a trip. The girl did not even suspect that she could be offered such a thing, as it had never happened before, and it was the first time she was offered to go on a trip far away, except that one of them was against Lissy going somewhere and going on a trip for a long time. And of course he tried to talk her out of the idea. And of course this person who didn't want to let Lissy go was Callan. He didn't even hide the fact that he didn't want her to leave, though he didn't really have the right to order her decision and say his opinion about it. When these three are together, you'd think they were good brothers and sister, except that all is not what it seems at first glance, because when the two of them are together without anyone else, their relationship instantly grows into something more. In which case, Lissy can't avoid bad rumors about herself, as many people too often see Callan and Lissy standing together and talking constantly. When they have free time, everyone also notices how he only in the presence of this girl begins to smile, and he has a good mood. So it becomes clear what is happening and creates a lot of rumors. The two of them realize this, but they try not to react to such opinions of others, because they believe that no one has the right to decide who should communicate with whom, and who should behave how they should behave. It's time to ask Edith what she thinks about it, and how she feels about Lissy going on a trip with that guy. Although it's weird because how can you ask someone for an opinion if it's only about the person who gets to decide? And in this situation it's Lissy. Everyone was eagerly awaiting her opinion, though it was probably more appropriate to just ask if Lissy herself wanted to do it, and if she agreed to go with the guy, since no one else had the right to decide anything for anyone else. There was only one problem. Edith wanted to know if Lissy wanted to agree to the proposal, and only with her opinion she could answer that question. Would Edith be able to decide instead of the girl whether she should go or not? The strangest thing in this situation was that Lissy listened attentively to what each of them had to say. It was important for her to hear their opinions, but it seemed that her choice would depend on it. And for example, if any of them were against the trip, the impression was that because of that, she might not have gone and would have listened to each of them. Edith didn't even know how best to answer all these questions. She didn't want to embarrass anyone or decide anything with her answer or opinion. She was embarrassed to say anything, because it seemed to her that nobody was going to listen to her opinion, and it wouldn't solve anything. And maybe they asked her just to show that her opinion is important, but it's probably not, and they're just trying to make it look like they really want to spend time with her and socialize. After those stupid questions, she realized that talking that way and saying weird things runs in the family, and after a little while she decided to answer that she didn't care at all. Besides, it was a decision that only Lissy should make, and no one else could do it. None of them had expected such an answer, and were surprised at this. For the first time in a long time, the girl dared to speak out and explain what she really thought. And this truth no one had ever heard from her before, because everyone had hoped that she would say something like that she didn't want to make a decision, or that she would abstain and not say anything at all. That she didn't want to make a decision, or she'd abstain and not say anything at all. But since she was given the opportunity to speak, she decided not to miss the opportunity, and to answer honestly. The girls said that they had overdone it a bit, because it was very strange for them to offer Lissy such a trip, and they had not taken into account many factors that were very important. Such long carriage rides are a hard time for a girl, and she is not even Mr. Cliff's fiancée, so she can say nothing good about this trip together. And it was very strange to suggest such a thing. Besides, he made a very big mistake, and he didn't ask Lissy in the first place if she was okay with it, and he started asking as if he had ignored her opinion and wishes on purpose, so it was very wrong on his part. Each of them seemed to ignore any word and participation in this conversation, as if she was an extra, and could not decide anything, even what concerned her and her decision. She must have been very offended that she was treated like a little child, for whom the parents decide everything, and she has no right to say something, even if she disagrees with something. And Edith noticed it very well, and understood what she was feeling now, because she had been in her place before, and it was happening seriously from the people she had lived with in their house all her life. So she felt very sorry for her, but unfortunately she couldn't solve the situation and help her in any way. Foxy needs to learn to stand up for herself, and make her own decision, and even if someone tries to do it in her place or influence her choice, it should never be allowed, because in time, it can become the norm. And then her opinion, as it actually happens now, no one will take into account, and will allow themselves to decide something for her. Although she is not a little girl, Lissy is an adult and independent girl who knows better what to do and what not to do. Of course, the fact that this situation has happened is very bad, and you will have to put a lot of effort and time to fix it, and it will not happen again, because it is really not normal. But it's still not too late to start fixing things. If this problem is taken seriously, she will do well, and she will never feel superfluous again when someone talks to her and makes a decision for her. The guy who offered the trip started talking about how Edith cared too much about Lissy's comfort, so he started convincing her she had nothing to worry about, and everything will go fine because he'll be there for her, and he'll make sure she gets there and back comfortably. I get the impression that this guy is in love with the girl he proposed traveling with, and it's starting to be noticed by everyone around him. He constantly wants to spend more time with her, and he doesn't even hide his desire to be around her all the time. But he seems to think that no one notices it at all, and he behaves normally enough so no one can suspect anything. When someone was against them being with a girl on a trip, he got very upset, because he didn't think so many people could be against it. And afterward he reflected that perhaps it would have been more proper to ask it of Lissy when no one else could hear it. That guy realized that he originally had to find out from Lissy if she wanted it, and it wasn't at all necessary to find out anyone else's opinion but hers. Evening came, and everyone went about their business, none of them noticing how quickly the time passed, because for the first time, they were all drinking tea together, and there were many topics for conversation. Callan walked by Lissy's room one day. She noticed it and asked why he was walking alone late at night. The girl thought he might have had some unpleasant situation, and was walking around because he couldn't rest easy thinking about it. Callan told her that everything was fine, and he just decided to take a walk because he couldn't sleep since he wasn't too tired for the day. They started talking about the fact that today the Duchess had asked the girls to pick out a dress for her, and after that, she decided to give everyone else a little gift, and they could pick out something for themselves. And today was the day she decided to give something for Lissy and Edith. It was something like a tradition, and all because the Duchess had always dreamed of having a daughter, and probably because of that, she asked the girls to stay behind to pick out their gowns, as if to daughters, for whom she had dreamed of doing this. But for the present she had only sons, and it would be strange to give them dresses, so she chose her helpers and her daughter-in-law to spend her time in this way. She had 2 sons, and because of that she always dreamed of having a daughter to spend all her free time with and fulfill her dream. But unfortunately that didn't happen. Lissy said she was very happy to spend time with his mother, and was always happy to help if she needed encouragement or some assistance. Afterward, the girl told how Edith had not chosen a single dress for herself, and said it would be easy enough to alter an old one. Callan was very much surprised by this, for he had not expected such a thing from his wife, and he was sure that she would not mind such a gift, and would take this chance. But it didn't happen at all as he had imagined. In fact, the girl didn't want to be too cheeky, and only asked for a small request. So she didn't take advantage of his mother's kindness, and said that it wasn't necessarily, but it turns out that he completely misunderstood his wife's act, and even in such a situation, he found something to blame her for. Callan thought that in this way she was trying to protest and show distrust towards their family's clothing designer. So it was certain that she came to the wedding in a dress that was completely different from what the designer would have suggested. As he suddenly noticed something, and seemed to realize now why she was surprisingly not annoying him today. And all because today she was wearing normal clothes that hid everything. So it was unpleasant for him to look at her earlier. Callan was always of the opinion that, judging by the way a man dresses, you can deduce what kind of person he is. So when a girl chose to wear clothes that didn't completely cover everything up, she was really ruining her impression of herself for Callan. Except that she didn't even know it because she dressed the way she was used to, and she didn't want to say anything bad about herself with her outfit. And since they've been talking about his fiancée for too long, it's starting to annoy him and ruin his mood. He even took his head in his hands. Does even her name give him such a negative feeling and he is disgusted to talk about her? Lissy asked why he had started to get angry so abruptly, for she did not think that the subject of his own wife could be a cause of irritability to him. The thing is, Callan is sure Edith has been very quiet and peaceful to date, but when everyone relaxes, she'll show who she really is. And even though they're married, the guy still feels apprehensive about her, and it looks like he's not going to trust her. But he had no other choice. He had to tolerate and accept the situation as much as he wanted to. The next day, her assistant comes to Edith to tell her that unfortunately her perfume and blush have run out, so she needs to buy new cosmetics. It was a surprise to the girl, for it had only been a short time and it was already over, though it wasn't surprising. Because every day a girl is constantly being colored by makeup artists, and it takes a lot of product. But there was one problem. You'd have to spend your own money to buy it, and Edith was thinking whether to do it or not. Since she has diamonds left over from all the dresses, they can be exchanged for money, and she can buy any cosmetics with them. And since the girl can't even leave her room in the morning without makeup, she needs to do something about it immediately, because it's very important to her. Before, when she was an ordinary girl, she never had to spend her money on cosmetics because there was no need for it. Now it's not the same times as it used to be, and it wouldn't hurt to stock up on everything you need. So in order to live up to her status, you have to groom yourself and look the part, and never skimp on cosmetics and the fragrance that will emanate from her throughout the day. If all this is not used, it will be difficult to maintain a beautiful image, as light makeup is still necessary to look a little better. After a girl asked to pick a good fragrance for her, they brought her several options, which were naturally the best ones. And it turns out a lot of ladies are willing to wait in line for years to get their hands on these perfumes. And they're also very expensive and not easy to find. But Edith's assistant somehow miraculously found them, and did something impossible, because it was almost impossible to find such perfumes. After the girl was convinced how good this fragrance was, she asked to create exactly the same one for her, so that you don't have to stand in line and wait a long time for it, and it will probably be much cheaper to make than buying it in a store, because they cost about the same as Edith spent on food for a month in her previous life. Then her assistant suggested we look at other options that were cheaper. A man who knows about perfume had this option, and he suggested something. A perfume that strongly resembled the real smell of a rose, and would be perfect for a girl, and it cost 3 times less than the last one. But it still seemed too expensive to her for just a bottle of perfume, and so she decided to just decline the offer and save the money, because that's her priority right now. And it wouldn't be a good idea to spend a lot of money on something that's not really important. Since Edith refused to choose anything, her assistant suggested mixing several flavors into one, to get something new without spending a lot of money. It seemed like the perfect fit for her, and it looks like she's going to have a new flavor in her collection after all. But, in that case, the person who offered various options will be left without profit because no one will buy anything from them. And since that's what he's here for, he'll hate to go home without money. In order to agree on something without offending anyone, the girl promised to buy something from him someday, because there's no way she could do it now, so she had to compromise. As a result, the proposal and decision was beneficial to all, and everyone was happy with the outcome of the conversation, so there was no conflict. And all because the girl chose to save her money and not spend it on something that wasn't necessary. But still, she had to splurge a little, and even that was a little sad for her. And as a result, she couldn't even buy everything she needed. But instead, she saved some money. She's always prioritized saving it over spending it on something she doesn't need, so she doesn't regret it later. Sometimes she doesn't think it's quite right, and it wouldn't hurt to please herself with sudden purchases once in a while. But so far it's been too hard for her, because in her previous life she was too hard up for money, and the habit of treating them too carefully is unfortunately, or fortunately, still there. And yet she made the decision to get rid of the habit of saving money on her own wants and purchases, because now there was no need for it. Edith knows for sure that someday she'll be able to get over it and enjoy herself more often. After she got some rest, she decided to take a little walk around the palace grounds. She liked being in the art museum the most. She was very comfortable and interested there, because there's always a special atmosphere and you don't want to leave. The only question she asked was if all these masterpieces were all handmade by someone. Edith couldn't believe that any human being could create something like this, for it was a work of art, and absolutely every sculpture looks very realistic and mesmerizing. It was also a great happiness for her to be able to look at all this in her own house, because it's much nicer to admire it when there aren't so many people around and you can look at it in peace. Every time Edith looked at the paintings, it became clear to her why so many people were willing to wait a long time to get their hands on it all. And obviously no money is spared at all for such a work of art, because it just looks priceless. Edith loved sometimes to just stop, stand still and feel the atmosphere around her. But this time the girl didn't expect anyone to get in her way, and especially it was a surprise to her when Callan approached her. She had expected to see anyone but him, since he usually tried to avoid meeting her at all costs. And now he approached her himself. And when asked what he wanted, he said he was in his home, and he said he had every right to be here. But in fact, the girl knew perfectly well that he had never liked art. And it turns out that he had come here for a reason, and no matter what she says, she knows she didn't come here to admire the paintings. It turns out it's the first time they've been alone together in a long time. But the conversation still doesn't work. They try to pick on each other. And because of that, everyone's a little uncomfortable, but no one's trying not to show it. To avoid an awkward pause, they were saved by the fact that they could talk about art. But the girl forgot that of the two of them. She was the only one interested in the subject, and Callan wasn't interested at all. But surprisingly, he did keep the conversation going, and it turns out he knows something about it after all, and even told her some interesting information that even she didn't know. At this time, they don't even realize how they've begun to communicate and have forgotten that they hate each other. Perhaps it was because they don't actually hate each other as much as they try to show it, and actually capable of finally making a relationship work. Callan even asked what the girl's favorite artist was. And it's really surprising because if he's genuinely interested, it's an indicator that he's not so bad for her anymore. Their conversation is starting to feel more like a normal conversation than it did before. And it's really weird to see that when Callan is with her, he's not angry at all, and talks to her normally. And now she's completely calm and hasn't had a bad word said to her. But maybe he's acting like this on purpose, and he's trying to get something out of it, pretending that he was interested in talking to her now, and was happy to keep the subject of art alive. Because it's hard to believe that a person can change so much in just a few hours. He was acting normal at first, but after a few minutes he was almost unrecognizable. But I still don't know what it could be related to or why he's doing it. But it wasn't perfect. Sometimes he was nervous, but unlike before, he was much better behaved. I bet the girl notices it too, and tries to figure out why he's doing it because it's too weird. Edith was so used to the fact that every time they met, she left in a terrible mood, that this time it was like I was set up for the same thing, and I didn't even think to believe that it could be so perfect. So I tried to joke with him sometimes to see if he'd really changed, or if he was just pretending, who she really isn't. That's what she wants to find out somehow, because she's never believed that people can change so quickly that they can stop hating someone in a matter of hours. But still, she was pleased to talk to him this time. It turns out he's a very pleasant person when he's in a good mood. The next day came, and as the girl had no plans, she decided to go for her usual walk. To spend her time in this way, she liked it best, because she was madly fond of flowers, and delighted in their fragrance. Every time she walked past them, so she'd previously chosen a floral perfume. Since aristocrats are usually free most of the time, they have to think of something to do absolutely every day. And for example, Edith chose to spend her time doing just that. Plus, she's very lucky to have a gorgeous home, an art gallery at her disposal at the moment, an insane amount of luxury cosmetics that you usually don't even have to buy, gourmet food that can be enjoyed with every meal several times a day, and also a great many assistants. But for herself, she had singled out the best and most reliable of them, and that was Anna's. When suddenly, as the girl stood pondering all this, she noticed that she had seen someone again. It was the man who had recently given her a tour of the house, and since they hadn't seen each other in a while, it was unexpected to see him. He immediately started wondering how she was doing, and asked what she'd been doing all this time. Edwin said she enjoys a walk in the garden almost every morning, and thanks to his help, she can now navigate the mansion with ease. And he was very happy that he was doing some good for her. And seeing how much easier it is for her because of his help, during the conversation, he remembered how different this girl was from the one he had known before, and still doesn't understand at what point she changed so much, because it's very noticeable, but still decided not to ask about it, in order to avoid misunderstandings and awkward situation. So they decided to say goodbye and go about their business. And even after that, this assistant looked at the girl with suspicion, and maybe started to notice something, all because he never believes that people can change so much beyond recognition. It turns out that a walk in the garden wasn't the only plan for the morning. This time she was interested in something else, and it's because she saw her husband yesterday as a completely different person, and wanted to see him sooner. So I woke up a little early and came over to watch him practice. But she didn't want him to see her and misunderstand her. So she just hid behind a tree and watched him. It's amazing that just a few days ago, she wouldn't have even considered finding a way to see him, and hope he was sincere yesterday, and didn't pretend to be interested in talking to her. It was just a matter of checking to see if he'd really changed. And as much as she didn't believe it, she really wanted it. So she decided to make sure of it right away. Literally the next day. But it didn't happen the way she'd imagined. She didn't manage to hide from them at all, and even forgot about hiding behind a tree. And that really was her mistake. Edith heard him say that the girl looked lovely, and at that moment realized that she had been noticed after all. Afterward, she felt most uncomfortable, and did not know what to do in such a situation, for he might think she was following him. But it turns out it wasn't like that. He wasn't saying it to her. He was saying it to Lissy, and that made her feel even more hurt, because she'd already agreed that he'd noticed her just to hear him say that. But it had turned out the other way around. She felt that in this situation she was acting like a little child who was unrequitedly in love with a person, who doesn't care about her at all, and no matter how hard she tries, he still has no feelings for her. To get out of this situation and forget about him, the girl decided to concentrate on her work. And I thought that this way, she wouldn't have to remember us anymore. He's really got a lot of work that's been piling up lately, and it would be nice to do something about it. And yet, when she decided to take the job, it wasn't as easy as she'd imagined. Lissy comes up to her, who for some reason has decided to ask what Edith is doing, though she has quite a lot of work herself. Did she have some free time? Or did she just decide to supervise an inexperienced girl? Lissy asked why Edith writes everything down in a spreadsheet, because they are used to doing it the other way around. But the girl explained that it's much easier this way, and it will be clearer to understand the data in the form of a table, because it's much easier to look where everything is written in its place, and you don't have to reread a lot of unnecessary text. So I tried to explain to Lissy that the Duchess would appreciate this way of framing the document, and realized that it was actually easier to take in the information that way. Because this method was brand new, Lissy tried to convince the girl that it was a bad idea, so it was better to do things the tried and true way. And just at that moment the Duchess comes up to them and then asks them if they're doing a good job or not. Edith very much wanted to share her option, in order to make it easier for many people to get things done. But because of what Lissy had told her, the girl was beginning to doubt if it was even worth it. But still she found the strength, and after seeing how hard it was for the other workers to handle the paperwork, she definitely decided to help them, because she didn't understand why she would spend a lot of time on it when she could, thanks to the decorating. Make it a lot easier on myself and spend less time on it. So I told the Duchess, and I really hoped she would like the idea. Plus, this method would help fit in a lot more information, and everything will look a lot clearer, and for sure other people who do this work will be very grateful to her. The main thing was to explain everything correctly, in order for the mistress to see the many advantages of such a method. It was obvious that one person among them was against it, and didn't understand what it was for, and so that Lissy wouldn't take offense at her, she decided to say that she was in on it too, to come up with the idea. But it looked like it was for nothing, and the girl wasn't exactly happy about it, as she actually thought quite differently. As suddenly, the Duchess realized how wonderful an idea it was, and of course praised Edith's, and also said how brilliant it was, and really wished they had thought of it sooner. And afterwards she said that in the future she would like to see all documentation in the form of tables, because it is really convenient, and asked Edith's permission to make her papers in this way from now on, sometimes also. And the girl, of course, said she's totally cool with it and would love for more people to do it. and in order to make the Duchess understand all about this method, the girl decided to go into more detail about it for some time longer. But at that moment Lissy was standing nearby, apparently displeased that she wasn't being praised, and no one was paying attention to her right now. The Duchess was so delighted with the idea that she went afterward to tell her son how much easier the paperwork was now, all thanks to Edith. This solution will help to shorten the working day by a few hours. The woman started to praise the girl in front of everyone, but didn't notice how Lissy started to feel redundant. And even Callan himself appreciated the idea and said it was brilliant, when suddenly his mom started talking about Edith, about her being in a difficult situation, and for her, it's also a marriage of convenience. The woman felt sorry for the girl, for she was left alone among strangers. She was telling him all this to make Callan treat her a little kinder. After all, it's very important to her right now, and it wouldn't hurt to make her comfortable. Plus, she will be much happier to be here when she feels cared for and loved by those around her. The guy didn't have time to respond to that, because at that moment, someone knocked on the door. It was the butler, and he must have had something to tell them, but when he realized they were all doing something, he said he'd probably better come back later. But the Duchess said it wasn't necessary and she could hear him out. Plus, she wanted to show him something. And after they let him in, the lad decided to show something Edith had given him today. And at that moment, Callan approached Lissy to ask her opinion about his mother's being very pleased with Edith's work, and he would like to hear what Lissy thinks of it. The girl replied that she absolutely agreed with everything the Duchess said about it, and thinks Edith is a very clever girl because no one has ever thought of it that way before. And she's got a lot of people thanking her because it's a whole different level of approach to the job. But for some reason Callan suspects something strange about all this, except it's not clear what it is that's confusing him. He wondered very much if Edith was so much cleverer than he'd first thought. But he was also sure that her abilities didn't mean that she was smart at all. It meant that she was intentionally trained to do such things. So he wanted to know what her goal was and what she wanted to accomplish. The same day in the evening, he resolved to go to Edith's at the same place where they had been yesterday. But what he needed it for is still unclear. Edith certainly didn't expect to see him for the second day in a row, and yet apparently he wanted it himself. It wasn't exactly like a coincidence to her, and she knew for a fact that he had come for nothing. So she decided to ask why he was here, and asked if it was because he wanted to see him after such a short time. But it looked like he wasn't going to say anything, and asked if she wanted him to leave. Edith said she didn't mind him staying longer, on the contrary, and they were able to talk again. From that point on, they started talking in riddles and without any specifics. It was like they were trying to create intrigue and watch each other's reactions. And also, for some reason, when Edith is around Callan, she has a really hard time controlling herself not to do it. And so she's always trying to play jokes on him or get him emotional somehow. The girl had a suspicion that perhaps he had come because he had seen her spying on him. So I wanted to know what she was doing it for. But maybe it's something else and she's worried for nothing. But at the moment she wasn't ready to talk about sad things and make excuses. So she changed the subject immediately. But you could see how much he wanted to talk about something and realizes they're trying to stop him, because the two of them were acting too suspicious, and it was hard to have a conversation. They started suspecting each other and looking for a catch that didn't seem to exist. And probably, it was interesting to play this game, and to find something that is not there. I just don't know how long it can last, and with each passing minute, the atmosphere becomes more uncomfortable and tense. Callan was visibly starting to get nervous, and didn't even let the girl open the window to look at the weather. His behavior was both frightening and strange, because not so long ago he had been much kinder. But as it turned out later, he wanted to start a conversation about clothes and designer, which the girl refused to do, and thereby showed that she did not read the design in the garments which the Duchess suggested as suitable and beautiful. It turns out that she openly insulted his mother and her taste in clothing. This was Callan's conclusion after the girl refused to try on a dress from a designer the Duchess had been seeking for years. It was unpleasant for him to imagine how the act might have offended his mother, and that was one reason why the lad treated Edith so badly. But the girl didn't understand if that was a reason to hate her, and besides, she never meant to hurt anyone, and to somehow resolve the situation and not see her in the clothes she wears anymore. He offered to find her own clothing designer, but it seemed she didn't like that offer very much. It seemed too outrageous and unacceptable to her. After all, she has the right to dress the way she wants to dress herself, and no one has the right to judge her choices. And afterward she told him that she had guessed long ago that he was only looking for a reason to hate her, and now he had found another reason. At this point she decided to speak her mind to him and tell him what she thought of him, because it had long since become obvious that Callan will never stop and will always blame Edith for something. It all became obvious as soon as they entered the wedding hall. Analyzing his behavior, one could have guessed everything from the beginning, blaming her for everything. He wanted to feel comfortable justifying his actions, and he also didn't care what it looked like from his side. It was all about leaving someone to blame and feeling right about it. This behavior allowed him to become more self-confident at the expense of others. Since it was all so obvious, there was no point in him making excuses or denying the facts. And if he wants to have a normal relationship in the future, he needs to deal with it and not do it again. The only thing he said was that his behavior was partly because he felt threatened by her. So he said he'd never let it happen, and he'd do everything he could to make sure it didn't. Edith was surprised that so many people had a bad opinion of her and suspected her of evil intentions. So it had to be fixed somehow, because there's no way you can give someone a reason to think that way. In order to change his mind, she decided to discuss it while he was listening, because then it could be too late and there's no chance to fix it. Edith started talking about how he was wrong to jump to premature conclusions, because he really didn't know anything about her. So I advised him not to be so sure that the girl could hurt his family or cause any trouble. But he had to prove it with time, because he couldn't take her word for it. At one point he advised her that if she wanted to gain his trust, she'd better not do anything that might arouse suspicion, and do less work with family papers. Only then can he reevaluate his opinion of her and finally trust her. But it will take a few years because it takes a long time to verify a person's honesty. When he said that to her, she was very uncomfortable, because she realizes there's no way to prove anything to him, and he's sure of something that doesn't exist. So her only option was to get out of there as soon as possible. When suddenly, surprisingly, Callan began to realize that he may have been wrong, and he felt a little bad for blaming the girl for everything, and not even listening to her. Began to speculate that perhaps it was because of the scent of roses that filled the entire room. So I said too much, but luckily he realized it eventually and admitted his mistake. Only he didn't let her know it, and she thinks he thinks the same now as he did a few minutes ago. Callan realized that he really didn't know anything about her, and had no right to suspect her of anything. And the amazing thing is that he realizes for himself that she's right, and he was wrong. Callan has such a poor opinion of her because he knew her as Triegelhoff's daughter, and never saw her as an independent person. He should have long ago treated her as a separate person, no longer ruled by her father long ago. And also, he was just now realizing that the girl had her own opinions, and could be different from her father, and unlike him, didn't want to cause trouble for his family. After a while Lissy came to him, for she had seen him on the way, and decided to approach him. And it seems like she got here just in time because Callan wasn't feeling so well, and he needed a distraction, which is something Lissy can help him with. She saw at once that he was pale, and inquired what was the cause of the... When he smelled the scent of violets, he felt so much better and more comfortable being there. Because he liked to hear the floral scent from the girls, it always made him feel better. Callan answered her afterward and told her he was fine, and for some reason told Lissy that Edith was the reason he was in a bad mood, and that he still doesn't trust her, and her sincerity has yet to be proven. Meanwhile, Edith invited her assistant into her room to offer her something. It turns out that because the girl was too bored, she decided to offer to go for a walk together. Before, when she wasn't feeling well, a cup of coffee and a brisk walk always helped. But first the assistant had to warn the Duchess about it, and afterwards said she would be glad to walk with Edith. For the moment, the girl's only entertainment is walking around the mansion grounds, so she'd like to think of something new and interesting to do in her spare time. But this time, the only thing she could do was ask an assistant to keep her company. And after they got outside, it was time to think about where they could go. Anna said she had absolutely no options, and it would be good to know Edith's preference. But still, I thought I'd give you a little hint of where you could go. To go shopping and to have coffee. There is a special street for that. And if they want to see opera houses, beautiful architecture, they can go elsewhere. And if suddenly they want to have a delicious lunch, you can go to a very beautiful place where you can buy the most delicious food. Edith immediately marveled that there were many options around where to go, and she's very glad Anna told her that. It turns out she needed to find a good jeweler, so she asked if there was one nearby. Anna knew a few options on where to find them. Well, it's going to take too long to get there because the place is so far away. Edith somehow thought that Anna wouldn't be able to tell her anything, but it turns out to be the opposite. The helper has helped to find out new places where Edith can go out now, and it turns out that besides the palace and the mansion, there are a lot of other places you should definitely visit. And yet they decided that they would go to the street where they could sell some jewelry and get paid for it. It was very important to her at the moment, and she decided to take the opportunity to get some money. But before she left, she had to count how many she had left so she could calculate how much she could spend. Luckily, she's removed a lot of diamonds from her dress that can be sold for a profit. And that's what Edith decided to do today because she could use the extra money more than ever. But first she went to the bank to open a new account, and luckily she got it right the first time. The girl thought it would be a lot harder and longer than it actually was. She feels much better now that she can store her money outside the mansion and it will stay safe. And since she couldn't be sure that the money wouldn't be taken from the mansion, she needed to secure it somehow. After they had done all their business, decided to go for a coffee and enjoy the incredible atmosphere of the street. But her plans don't end there, and the next step will be, he immediately wanted to touch her hand, but he didn't even warn her about it. Anna said people usually rent a carriage or pay for a train ticket, but unfortunately, the second option will be less comfortable than a carriage ride. So you'll have to choose a comfortable option for yourself. You have to decide what's more important to her, comfort or saving money, and then you can decide on transportation. Plus, you'll need to check in somewhere afterward and find a place to stay temporarily. Edith realized that she would have too many more questions for her assistant on this subject, and this was not their last conversation on the subject. But you have to be careful with her, because she can tell the Duke anything she finds suspicious. And yet the girl had made the right choice in inviting Anna for a walk, for thanks to her, Edith had learned a great deal of important information. And of course the girl thanked Anna for agreeing to spend the evening with her, then suggested we go out more often and take a few days off work a week. After Edith got to her house, she decided to look up some useful information about what she'll need when she has to move to another house after she runs away. But as usual, she didn't get a chance to sit alone, because an assistant came in and informed her that the Duchess was calling for her. It turns out that the jeweler had already come to see her, and you had to go meet him. But this situation is interesting not because the jeweler has come. In the story, this is the exact day that Edith would want someone to humiliate and insult her. Each season, the ducal Ludwig family invites a renowned jeweler to their home. This is the first episode of Lissy and Edith's clash right after the wedding, and things are starting to get more and more interesting as they happen. As always, all the family's attention was focused on just one of them, Lissy. Everyone was used to Lissy always drawing attention to herself, and she was always the center of attention as well. However, she acts like it makes her feel awkward and uncomfortable. It's all seen by Edith, and yet she's always in the shadows, because usually no one pays attention to it. How suddenly it's time to look at the jewelry. When Lissy saw them, she said they definitely look great on Edith. Without realizing the consequences, Lissy recommends a small necklace to Edith, and it turns out that she has decided to choose her own jewelry for Edith instead of her. Edith in turn thanked her for her concern, and Lissy said she didn't mean to impose her opinion. And for some reason after that, Edith said she wished she'd actually chosen a different piece of jewelry. She'd trust Lissy's choice, thus embarrassing her. After that, everyone started to choose the right jewelry for themselves, and there was really a lot of choice. Everyone started advising each other of their options and having a good time. It's no wonder because for any girl, this is the most ideal pastime, and there's nothing better. Under normal circumstances, Edith would have been happy to help them choose, but today was not the day. This time, she was very uncomfortable with one person. Because of him, she wouldn't even want to come here because he was so distracting. And of course it was Callan. As Edith looked at everything the jeweler had brought them, it was hard for her to imagine how much it might be worth. And at that moment, the girl hears Lissy calling her. Did she notice that Edith's was in a bad mood and sad, although she tried not to show it? It turns out that Lissy found another matching piece of jewelry for Edith and offered to try it on, for it was really gorgeous, and in the girl's opinion, the most beautiful of them all. And of course, without a doubt, she liked it. But the girl thought it was too expensive, and there was no point in even dreaming about it. So I didn't even look in his direction, and paid attention to something less expensive, and of course she couldn't refuse to try it on. So she gladly accepted. But in order to do that she needed help, so she asked Callan. The girl hoped very much that he wouldn't refuse her, and yet he consents, as in the presence of other people, he could not refuse her. But it was still nice for her to feel some help from him. even if it was under these circumstances. When it was time to look in the mirror, Edith couldn't even imagine the beauty she was about to see. It was impossible to describe how grateful she was to the Duchess for such an opportunity to try on such a gorgeous piece. But the first thing she wanted to do was ask Callan what he thought of the jewelry, and ask if it fit her or not. Of course, the girl knew she would embarrass him with that question, and she did it on purpose. He said it was a nice piece of jewelry and pretended like he didn't care, when suddenly something happened that the girl didn't even expect. He decided to buy her this jewelry. It was just incredible, and no one expected him to give such a gift to his bride. And after that, he decided to buy everything else to keep everyone happy. Then you wouldn't expect him to do that, because he's been sad all the time, and he suddenly decided to please his women. At that moment, the atmosphere around became incredible. Everyone was so happy and couldn't be happy with their gifts. He acted like a real man and pleased every one of them. It remained to be seen whether he did it to please them or for some other purpose. It would probably become clear soon, but in any case, each of them was very grateful to him. No one expected this day to end in such a pleasant way. Evening came, and the girl decided to look at all the letters that had accumulated of late. Among them, there was one that interested her very much, and she wanted to open it first. After all, it was somehow special, and the girl noticed it first among all the others. It turned out to be a letter from her father, which she didn't want to read, but she had to do it anyway. It said that she shouldn't waste her time, and it was time to do her assignment. He knew that the girl often had access to documents, so she needed to find the right document among them, and immediately send a copy to her father. So I wondered if she'd agree to do it, or if she'd still say no and side with the new family. But there was one very important point that confused her at once. How he knew that the girl was helping the Duchess with the paperwork. Which means there's a spy in the mansion who's probably in bed with her father. So it was necessary to immediately think about who this person could be. Since this is really important, we need to find this spy as soon as possible. Which means that Edith has changed her mind about being on her father's side after all, and no longer wants to help him and cause trouble for the Duchess and the family. Most likely the girl decided to answer her father after all, and tell him that she would no longer do his assignment. Plus, she doesn't want to hurt this family at all because she sees how well she is treated here, and there is no point in doing anything bad for them. She just can't afford to betray them and participate in something like this. But that wasn't the only thing the girl wanted to write. She wanted to warn her father that it was time for him to give up now, because he has little chance of his plan succeeding as a result. And he doesn't even have to try to come up with a new plan because Edith will tell the Duke and Duchess right away. After that, she felt much better, for she had said all she had long wanted to say, and there had just been a good opportunity to do it. Now she can live with everyone else in good conscience and continue to enjoy her life. Especially she doesn't have to fulfill his demands since he's not even her real father. When he did find out that his daughter had betrayed him and refused to cooperate, it was a surprise to him, and he didn't think she was capable of such a thing. And then something weird started happening and she started getting suspicious, and questioned if she had anything to do with the duchy documents falling into the wrong hands. Edith said she had nothing to do with it, and she wasn't interested in it anyway. But it's not clear why she was suspected or what could have happened. In addition, the girl refused to cooperate and fulfill her father's assignments, so she doesn't understand why she's being accused of something. It looks like she's being framed, and everyone who can. Edith had absolutely no idea what they wanted from her, or what it all meant. It seemed to her that everyone had conspired to treat her badly at the same time, when suddenly she was given some paperwork to look at for some reason. Every minute she grew more and more frightened and incomprehensible, though she had really done nothing wrong. At that moment, the Duke told her that these papers she had just been given are a document made up entirely of false information. But what would that mean? And they can only charge her if she actually sent that information to someone. And it turns out that somehow her father made an order for what was listed on the document. So this is proof that he used those fake credentials. So everyone was sure that his daughter had given them to him. And that's why they're here now. It was very strange, because Edith realized that she had nothing to do with it. So she tried to convince and prove to everyone that someone else did it, and they were wrong to suspect her of it. Well, of course no one believed her, because this information was in her possession, and only she could easily pass it on to her father. But the thing was, it was the Duke who gave her access to the information, and she wasn't the only person who could do something like that. So she tried to prove that she wasn't the only one to be suspected of it, as some of them could have been just as involved. The Duke then asked if the girl was trying to blame it on his family, and wants to say that one of them is capable of such a horrible act. Besides, he was the one who had an arrangement with her father and she had nothing to do with it. It was a surprise to them when the girl spoke of the fact that a traitor might be among them, but no one was willing to allow even the idea that this might be the case, and of course the Duke was very indignant. But Edith was not going to give up, and tried to prove by any means possible that she was not guilty of anything, and said something about not trusting her with the paperwork if someone was in doubt about whether she could be trusted or not. And anyway, what was the point of entrusting her with the job if someone didn't trust her with it then? When the girl realized that no one was going to listen to her, said that she was obviously a decoy to put pressure on Count Triegelhoff, and maybe each of them took advantage of it, while hiding how she really felt about it, and Edith was getting too tired of it. She was sick of being a part of something like this. Plus, she has said many times that she really doesn't understand how this could have happened. And the most frustrating part was that the butler she trusted had just betrayed her at that moment. Even so, she knew for sure that her father's spy was walking around somewhere nearby. So one must find out who he really was by any means necessary. Actually, in the story, it was really Edith's fault. But it certainly wasn't her now. As soon as she started working on the documents, somehow all the information available to her was immediately in her father's possession. And in the story, the Ludwig family was able to manipulate Count Triegelhoff by providing false information. And Edith, who was exposed and put on probation, never again had a chance to forget Killian's fiancé. One wonders if the girl will be able to prove that they are accusing her for nothing, and that she should turn her attention to a completely different person. With each passing day, she realized that there was less and less time left, so she needed to find a way out of this situation. And it was obvious the sooner she did, the sooner she could finally live a peaceful life, and no longer have to prove anything to anyone. But unfortunately, in the story, she was supposed to die, and that's where her involvement ends. So it was either follow fate or make a change to avoid a bad ending. It was too hard for her to decide, because the second option would take too much effort and time, which she had less and less of. Plus it was really hard to hold back the tears, and how hurt she was that no one wanted to believe her. The girl asked, wondering if they didn't remember that she had recently promised not to lie to anyone, and that she would never betray them. So she asked to make the final decision whether they believe her or not. If not, she agrees to any punishment, because she no longer wants to feel guilty about something she had nothing to do with. And when Killian heard this, he immediately suggested to his father that instead of jumping to premature conclusions, he should investigate further, because they really don't have any evidence yet, so they can't accuse her of anything. And of course, until they figure something out, the suspect will be constantly monitored to make sure she can't escape. And she'll be put on probation to make sure she's honest, because they had no other option for now. And so it was necessary to be sure of her words after investigation, because then it'll be clear, and they can decide how they want to proceed. After the conversation, Killian for some reason ordered Edith to follow him, and listen to everything he said to her. But no one yet suspected what he was up to, or what he was doing it for it all happened too quickly. It turns out that he was unhappy with what she'd offered, namely that she'd agreed to accept any punishment, even if she turned out to be innocent. Maybe he just trusted her a little bit, but he didn't want to talk about it in front of his dad. It proves that maybe Killian trusts her, and doesn't want her to take punishment for something that wasn't her fault. And I didn't understand why she'd go along with it so easily, because she knows the truth, and she shouldn't have to go along with it. It was a little strange of him to decide to hear her out and talk to her in private. Was he really afraid that the girl would have to admit her guilt, even though she hadn't done anything wrong? And he wishes he hadn't, and maybe he could help her in some way, to prove she had nothing to do with the situation. But she's already accepted that she's going to get blamed either way, so she doesn't have a chance to change anyone's mind. No one will even believe her since she is the daughter of a man who wants to hurt their family. None of them are considering the possibility that she might be telling the truth. And I've never really thought about doing anything bad. It didn't matter to her whether he believed her or not. She was just waiting to see what would happen next. But all of a sudden, Killian promised he would not be biased in any way. He would make everything fair, and conduct an honest investigation that will show who really is a spy and who shouldn't have been trusted. And also surprisingly said he wouldn't let anyone unfairly accuse her if there was no evidence for it. And also try to keep her informed of anything he finds out. So really, he probably trusts her. And he can't believe she would do such a terrible thing to his family. But then the girl asked him something he didn't expect her to say. If circumstances should happen to bring her and Lissy under suspicion at the same time, would he be fair to look into the whole matter? And of course he didn't know what to say to that. For such a question really made him wonder which side he was on. But all she can do is watch and hope that they find the real traitor, and she won't have to answer for someone else's bad behavior. And she'll go on to live the happy life she's always dreamed of. In the meantime, Lissy arrived, and of course absolutely everyone went to meet her after her long drive. They were all very happy to see her, and some of them had really missed her all this time. And at some point a girl came up to her and started greeting her and saying she was also happy to meet her, because they haven't seen each other in a long time and they have a lot to talk about and tell each other. This girl's name is Princess Catherine of Iberia, the only relative of the present emperor, who is a year younger than he is. She's the only woman in the empire with short hair and who doesn't like dresses, so she's most often seen in pants wherever she goes. Everyone is not ambivalent enough about her. Some people are fine with her and some people think she's weird. And usually, everyone's used to the fact that a girl can insult or humiliate anyone standing next to her in some way, which is what happened in this moment. She started acting weird towards Lissy, who just wanted to say hello, and she was reprimanded because you can't watch Catherine try to hurt someone for no reason. One of the guys stood up for Lissy and asked if Catherine had any problems or manners, because that kind of behavior is unacceptable. But the girl replied that she was only joking, and it was not necessary to take her words seriously. It was time to go inside the mansion because it was getting hotter and hotter outside. At this point, Catherine noticed that Callan hadn't joined them, and wondered what the reason was for that. She was told that he had a fiancé, so he couldn't leave her alone, but then that guy decided to tell Catherine about their relationship problems, and he felt he had the right to do it, even though he did it in a very ugly way. He said it wasn't love, but a political game played by the Gelhofs, but Catherine didn't want to hear those names at all, and she didn't feel comfortable talking about it. Besides, it was unclear to her why he had chosen to tell her at this point in time. When they came in, a guy came up to them and said that the emperor had been expecting a guest for some time now, but instead of hurrying up, they decided to argue about some topic and got into an argument out of nowhere. Lissy had absolutely no idea if they were really interested, or how long this conversation was going to go on for. Surprisingly, Catherine said she didn't feel like proving anything to him anymore, and opted to spend time with Lissy instead. Her strong interest in Lissy is a bit alarming to those around her, but so far things don't look too suspicious, and it was too early to draw any conclusions because nothing bad happened, and maybe they're just wrong. At which point Callan came up and they started asking him about Edith, to which he asked them not to talk to him because he didn't care about it. But that guy didn't care, and he started a conversation about Edith's betrayal. He wanted to make Callan angry, and he succeeded. What he didn't know was that Callan was on Edith's side, and it was important for him to prove that she had nothing to do with what had happened. And it looks like he was the only one who wanted to protect the girl, and he cared about her. But so far no one knew about it, or realized that he didn't think Edith was guilty of anything. All subsequent events the girl tried to accept as something inevitable, and decided to just follow fate. And probation. It was a great opportunity for her to enjoy some alone time. Edith just decided to look on the bright side of things and find some upside. At least it was, up until one point, when Callan decided to come over and have dinner with her, probably to discuss something important. But before that, when they first sat down at the table, Edith asked him for what purpose he wished to spend this time together, and afterward she said that he had not warned her, and it was a surprise to her when he arrived. But she didn't hear the answer right away. For some reason the guy thought long and hard about what to say, and still replied that he just hadn't had time to warn her, and asked if she minded having dinner together. Of course it was no problem for her to have dinner together, but she would want to know about it in advance, in order to prepare herself. And once again I was convinced that sometimes he completely forgets about manners, and that sometimes it's better to warn about something in advance. Even if it's something minor, it doesn't change the fact that you need to think about the other person, and not create surprises for them. Makes it seem as if it doesn't matter to him and he can do whatever he wants. But unfortunately, because of that, the girl notices how much he doesn't care about putting her on notice about anything. Even so, it's better to enjoy your meal at the moment and not think about anything unpleasant, because it's enough the rest of the time, and it's better to get rid of it at this point. So they changed the subject and started talking about what a delicious dinner they had prepared for them. But still, even after changing the theme, the atmosphere around was still uncomfortable. And of course there was still no way to avoid talking about the investigation, and it turns out that Lissy was also on the suspect list, like Edith said from the beginning, and finally find out who the real traitor was, and who was suspected and accused for nothing. While their family is also understandable, Edith was still a relative stranger to them after all. And no matter how good a relationship they had, they couldn't be sure of the girl. Besides, they had the right to do it, and she should realize that the only thing she could do was try to prove she wasn't involved, which she did, but unfortunately no one believed her at first, which is to be expected. Edith liked the food so much that she decided to ask if she could finish the last course, and if Callan was still hungry. The guy replied that of course she could finish the soup, since he'd had enough. After dinner they all went to their rooms, and as usual Edith felt worse after he had gone than she did in his presence. So to keep you from getting bored, she decided to give you a hobby, and she remembered that she used to do origami. To come up with something new, Edith asked her assistant what the girls had been up to lately. Anna said that usually everyone was either embroidering or painting, the most common hobbies she could suggest. But it seems that embroidery she will definitely not be interested in, and had to pick up something else. Drawing could also be difficult because she had never been able to draw, and one might not even try to do it again. And about writing, Edith was pretty sure that wasn't her option, and asked if there were any other options. But unfortunately, she herself had a hard time imagining what hobby she would like to choose for herself. For such an occasion, Anna had one last option. After all, creating clothes for dolls has become very popular lately. And besides, this way you can improve your sewing skills, and it may come in handy in the future. This option has really interested Edith, and it seems she wants to try to design some clothes and experiment with it. But first it was necessary to prepare the money and calculate how much she was willing to spend on it. And after that, the helper will go to the store to buy all the necessary supplies. And there was also a nice little bonus for Anna. If there was any money left over after the purchase, she could keep it for herself. But there's another important point, and it's not for nothing that the girl asked Anna for help. The fact that she was constantly watching her was known to her from the start, and there's never been a situation where Anna's been rude to Edith. Initially, the girl didn't see anything suspicious in it, but each time she noticed the oddity, and maybe this is her way of checking on her assistant, but maybe it's just a simple request and the check will come a little later. Edith watched with interest to see whether her assistant would accept such a bonus, or whether she would still find such an act unacceptable and refuse it. The girl hoped that her assistant would consider such an act as impudence and still refuse, but unfortunately, she still agreed to it. And everything started out so well. Edith was upset with the result of the inspection, and this situation gave reason to doubt the assistant. After a while, the girl got all the supplies she needed and began sewing her first clothes. But unfortunately, it hasn't worked out for her so far. It's not as easy as she thought it would be. But luckily, everything Anna bought was of excellent quality, so all that was left to do was practice, and in time it was bound to work out. A little later, Edith noticed that there was too much shopping because she had not expected so many supplies on the first day. Now she was out of options, and she'd have to really learn it all. Seems to be a hobby perfect for Edith. She didn't even notice how much time had passed. It's an indication that she's found something she's really interested in doing, and she never had the time or opportunity to do something like this before, and it's considered a luxury hobby. And so the girl is very pleased that she has found an occupation for which she will not spare her time at all, and which will bring her pleasure. She is very pleased to look at the finished products, because she made them with her own hands. Edith really feels very comfortable and enjoyable when creating new outfits for the dolls. It's an opportunity to be imaginative, and experiment, creating unusual looks, and eventually one day you can create your own collection of clothes. When suddenly, at that moment, someone shouts her name, and very quickly runs up to her. The girl was very much frightened. It turns out that a document was found that was written in her handwriting, and it looks like it's going to reveal something, or complicate the investigation. Meanwhile, Callan's brother and sister decided to talk about it, and they had the same opinion on it, and they were just looking for an excuse to talk about it and make fun of the girl, because they were both against her for some reason. His sister asked what it took to get probation on their honeymoon, and his brother replied that it was enough just to reveal the contents of some internal documents of the duchy to frame their family, and thereby fulfill the assignment her father had given her, and if everything had gone according to his plan, he would have gotten some benefit. But luckily, he didn't succeed. But after that, the brother decided to reassure his sister, and told her that the documents her father had gotten were not real. so he won't be able to harm their family in any way. And all thanks to the fact that they've thought ahead to make sure they don't find themselves in this situation. They then started talking about how much they dislike the fact that Callan has been caring and treating his wife much better lately. The two of them didn't understand how he could treat her normally after what she'd done, much less help her with anything, and thought it was very stupid of him to trust and help a girl who wanted to hurt his whole family. Callan's sister was outraged when she realized that perhaps Edith would attain some status after what she wanted to do, which is why she's their next target, if the current situation of Lissy being involved with Cliff remains the same. The prenuptial agreement between Edith and Callan will end there, so they had to come up with some sort of plan to keep the new empress out in the person of Edith. Only none of them knew where to start, or what it would all look like. Calliana's brother tried to make sense of it and see what she meant, but he still didn't understand anything. The only thing that interested Callan's sister was why Edith and Lissy were so good together, and there was never any conflict between them. It seems that this girl has decided to get rid of both of them at the same time, but it's not entirely clear what she wants to achieve, and what she needs as a result. Edith, meanwhile, is eager to find out what Callan meant, and what the consequences will be afterward. But first, she started to get mad at him, because of the fact that he ran into her place without permission, and didn't even knock to enter. But at that moment, he didn't think about it at all. The main thing was to tell about everything and warn the girl, because soon she'll be called by his father, and she'll have to explain it somehow. Because with that evidence, she could definitely be charged and found guilty. And now it's much more serious. But at that moment, it became obvious to her that someone was trying to find non-existent evidence in order to get rid of her as soon as possible. But Callan doesn't seem to realize this at all, and is starting to get too nervous because of it. At this moment, the butler comes in to see them, and they waited eagerly to see what he had to say. It appears that the Emperor has ordered Edith to come to his study immediately to discuss something very important. It was evident from his face that he, like everybody else, believed that Edith was guilty of something, and he didn't even hide it, because he had no reason to trust a girl he didn't know. Surprisingly, the girl was not afraid at all. On the contrary, she looked absolutely sure of herself, so she did not wait a moment, and went at once to the Emperor's study. It was obvious that the Emperor would show her the documents that were written in her handwriting, for he was very interested in her opinion on the matter. The girl in that second said only one thing. This document was forged by someone and it's not her real handwriting, so it's very silly to claim she did it. The Emperor replied that it was her father, not her, who should be punished, so he would not punish her. It is very surprising and strange, though, and why the Emperor suddenly decided to shift the blame to another person, who they claim would not have gotten this information without the help of their daughter, who they no longer want to punish for some reason, and in order to prove once again that she'd been set up. The girl showed me her spreadsheet and offered to compare them. It was obvious that they were completely different. But even on that evidence, the Emperor assumed it was as if she had done it on purpose, so that she could just now remove suspicion from you. She had one more piece of evidence. She said she wouldn't use her handwriting if she was involved in this, and it was convincing enough. So Edith asked for some more documents to make sure. Anna should have them, and it seems it won't be long before it's clear whether the girl is guilty or not. With the full assurance that this attempt would prove futile, the butler went in search of the papers of the... Plus she had one clue that would make it a lot easier to track down a spy. It could only be done by someone with a slight understanding of spreadsheets, such as Duchess or Lissy, who only recently learned it. But it's not worth it to someone to make it so hard for themselves, because it could have been quicker and easier. Meanwhile, the Emperor was analyzing her handwriting. He noticed some differences. Plus, there were obvious differences that were evident from the start, and that couldn't be denied. Like the one letter the spy mistakenly forgot to spell to match the girl's real handwriting. It was really different, and quite unlike Edith's actual handwriting. So the girl hopes that someone will believe her after all, and treat her a little better. It was becoming very interesting what the Emperor himself thought about it, because he had in his hands the real proof that Edith might be telling the truth, and there was less and less evidence that she was guilty. When suddenly, Lissy walks into the office. Turns out she's been summoned by someone, and may now be one of the suspects. Callan immediately decided to ask what she was doing here and who called her. But it turns out it was his father. The first thing he said, it was that she was the person who helped the Duchess with her work, and she had recently learned how to organize information with a spreadsheet. The girl did not deny it, and said it was really a very effective way. Besides, the Duchess was very glad of it. After that, Lissy began to wonder if she knew who else the Duchess had trained in this method, and who might still be creating tables. And as a result, everyone concluded that Edith and the whole of the Emperor's family were in on it. It turns out that they did. So you can't deny the possibility that one of them could have done it. However much they want to believe it, it could be true. Except for some reason, Lissy decided to ask why they were all asking her that. Edith noticed that she was starting to act a little differently than usual, and Lissy was really starting to get agitated when she was asked different questions. The Emperor did answer her question after all, and said that no one owed her an explanation as to why it was all being asked, so she was free to go now. But still somehow the Emperor continued to be on Lissy's side, and all the evidence Edith had provided still meant nothing to him. So he said the conclusion was obvious. The girl couldn't believe it. It was as if she had just talked about everything for nothing and was trying to prove something. She's getting tired of being there, because it seems like no matter what facts and evidence she shows them, no one would believe her on purpose. It was as if the Emperor didn't want to believe that the girl was telling him the truth, and it was impossible to end the investigation just yet. She's starting to get nervous, because absolutely no one's even trying to believe her. Although maybe the thing is, they could all just be setting her up, and it's really them who did all this. Also, it's very strange that Lissy didn't even try to say anything in her own defense. And even without that, everyone believed her and started picking on Edith, who has proven many times that she had nothing to do with it. It was as if Lissy knew she would be believed and didn't even bother to say anything. Which could be why someone's protecting her. It all boils down to one thing. It's clearly someone's plan and she had no other options. At one point, the girl sees Callan reading her diary, and she's very perturbed by it. She immediately yelled at him and told him it was very rude to read someone else's diary without permission. She was very uncomfortable at that moment because it felt like everyone now knew what she was thinking. But maybe this will be the reason why it will be another proof. Because it probably says that the girl sincerely recently changed her mind about helping her father, but that was to be seen a little later, and for the present she had only to watch what was happening. Because the situation is much better now that there's some evidence in her favor, and now the Emperor doesn't treat her as badly as before. After the conversation, Callan decided to talk to the girl and explain his position to her, because she must realize that he can't fully trust her, because she's the daughter of a man who's always wanted to hurt his family. And there's nothing wrong with that. You could at least thank him for agreeing to do an honest investigation. Just at that moment, she started remembering some of the plot points. The real Edith not only attracted all the men in order to get some information from them, she also did something bad for those who were on the side of the Ludwig family, and she was being very mean to the other girls, and she did it on purpose, and sometimes even fell in love with other men and spent time with them, which is why she was hated by absolutely all women. Because it was very hard for her to cope with the role of the real Edith. She was very upset, because she should have been much more assertive, and not let herself be insulted. But in all of this, some nice things started to happen. Like Callan started to take care of the girl a little more often and show interest in her. This time he offered to take her to her room to be near her, though he has not yet confessed it to anyone. But so far the girl hadn't paid attention to that because she had a lot of other problems. But at least she'd managed to get rid of her probationary period. In addition, Lissy seems too strange to her, and Edith begins to look more closely at her. Because it can't be ruled out, because really everyone in her circle could have wanted to frame her, so it's advisable not to rule out the possibility that even the closest person wanted to hurt her, and make everyone suspect Edith, who really had nothing to do with it. But clearly the person who did it knew she'd be the first to be suspected. While she was outside the door, she had a perfect opportunity to listen to what they were talking about, for there might be something interesting to say. It remained to be seen what Lissy was trying to do, and whether she was guilty of anything at all. Although maybe she's just trying to deflect suspicion from herself. On the one hand, she's being noble, but at the same time she's obviously hiding something, and Edith has to keep these two options in mind. And the main thing was to find out, in case the spy turns out to be Lissy, what Callan will do in that case. Whether he will protect her, or remain fair to the end. The next morning, the girl had some sort of plan and decided to hide again and watch Callan practice. The girl often wrote about it in her diary, and also sometimes about how she was in love with him, because he was incredibly handsome. All these words recently Callan could read, and so far that was the only thing she was worried about, because she really wouldn't want him to find out. And the girl looked like just another girl in love with him in his eyes. And if it did, it would forever make her feel as awkward and uncomfortable as possible if she saw him or was near him. But unfortunately, she has no way of knowing, because she hasn't seen him read what was written in the diary. After talking to the girls, Callan decided to ask his brother to compete, because he needed to get rid of stress and bad emotions, and training helps him to do that very well. So he always knew that this way he would be able to calm down and come to his senses, no matter how stressed or angry he would have been beforehand. But unfortunately, he didn't have enough people to compete with on equal terms. So every time he offered it to his brother, because only he could stand up to Callan. The next morning came, and surely something equally interesting would happen that day, and it would be well if Edith could have something more to prove in her favor that day. It appeared that since the morning the girl had been preparing to go to the Duchess's study, and apparently a serious conversation awaited them. I wonder what exactly Edith wants to tell her, and what they will talk about. For surely the topic will be about getting to the bottom of this unpleasant situation. There are two options. Either the Duchess will be able to help the girl, or Edith will see something suspicious in the behavior of the Duchess, and will be able to understand something new for herself. All that's left is to watch and hope that this conversation does some good for each of them. It seemed that the girl had come to speak earnestly to the Duchess, for she trusted her most, and could confess everything to her. Edith hoped that at least she would be able to understand her, and the girl would have a person who would take his side, and could support him in such a difficult moment. She said that the Duchess was not obliged to believe her, as the woman had the right to have her own opinion about what was going on. But still the girl did not let out the option that maybe the Duchess trusted her and could listen to her. When Edith looked earnestly into her eyes, and began to confess that she had nothing to do with what had happened, the Duchess at once took the girl's hands and said something important. She said she believed her. Edith just couldn't believe it, because she couldn't even dream of what she had just heard from this woman. It was incredibly pleasant and unexpected for her. The Duchess said she imagines how hard it is for the girl right now, because she has to single-handedly change the minds of so many people who have a bad attitude towards her and are not going to believe her for anything. The woman began to remember how responsibly Edith approached all the tasks she gave her, and was very happy that she was doing well. The girl had learned everything in just a few hours, although the others had to be taught much longer. And also the woman noticed very well how Edith tried to please everyone, and to keep good relations with everyone, and it was very pleasantly remarkable. It turns out that the Duchess had once traveled the same path, and faced similar problems alone. But in time, she did well, because she never thought of giving up. After that, the woman said that it was hard for her to understand who benefited from such a bad act towards the girl. But he believes that Edith will soon find this person, and everything will be fine. The girl was so pleased to hear this that she immediately cried, and felt real warmth and care, for the first time in a long time, just what she had missed for a long time. She felt that she was not alone in this situation, and there was a person she could approach at any time, and she would always be listened to and supported. This is now more necessary and important than ever for her, and when she did decide to say something, though it was very difficult because of tears and emotions, something unexpected happened. Did she see something that was shocking to her? Or maybe she just realized something important, and remembered something that could help her prove that she wasn't guilty of anything. And that will become clear very soon. But in fact it happened quite differently. She just fainted for no reason. It happened too quickly and unexpectedly. So they immediately decided to tell Callan about it. And of course after such news he could not ignore it, and immediately began to ask what was the reason for it, because it could be much more serious than it seemed at first glance. His assistant told all he knew, so that they might be in time to help Edith, for such a thing could not be delayed, and it was urgent to get someone to help her. Callan decided that her health was far more important than continuing her training. And of course he didn't wait a second. He ran towards her. It was important for him to monitor her condition, and to see how he could help her to get better as soon as possible. Because it is not yet known why it happened, and what caused her to lose consciousness. Just minutes after it happened, a doctor arrived, and she seemed to understand what the problem might be and why the girl had fainted. Unsurprisingly, it could have been caused by a sudden degree of overexertion due to being under stress for a long time, as well as the fact that the girl is often worried about something and is prone to nervous exhaustion. After the doctor's words, Callan seriously thought about the fact that all this should be avoided so that such a situation would not happen. Besides, one should take care of one's health, and one should not ignore such situations. The doctor advised after the girl wakes up to try not to create situations for her, because of which she may be nervous and worried, and it is desirable to rest a few days in a calm environment, because it is now really important. It was hard for the people around her to imagine how hard and unpleasant it was for her to be in an environment where they hated her and didn't want to believe a word she said, and also began to suspect her of something she had no part in. And to all this, she had no support, and had to cope with everything alone. After such, any person will be morally exhausted, and no wonder that there was such a situation. And the girl fainted. After this, Callan felt a little guilty about it, and so did everyone else. But still, it didn't affect their opinion of Edith. It seems that after this, it will be necessary to postpone the investigation for a few days, or at least do it in such a way that Edith does not know or see it, for it is very important to her now, and it is necessary to try to ensure her rest for the next few days. After the doctor left, Callan decided to ask his mom what she was talking to the girl about, and wondered what she might have been nervous about. The Duchess said that Edith came to her and started talking about how no one believed her, even though she wasn't really guilty of anything, and asked for some kind of support at least for when she needed it. And she also claimed that she really had no idea who the spy might be. Callan remembers that Edith tried to tell him the same thing some time ago, but he didn't believe her then, and when his mother said that she actually trusted the girl, he didn't expect it, because he didn't think that his mother could trust a strange girl after such a short time, even if she really had nothing to do with it and did nothing wrong. But as his mother is a very kind woman, she thought there was no reason to accuse Edith of anything they were not sure of, and yet had no evidence against her. The woman also spoke of the fact that the girl cried after hearing the words of encouragement, and this shows that Edith was as sincere as possible at that moment, and there was no reason not to trust her. It was surprising that the word made her feel so good, because it was the first time she had heard it in a long time, and it was so unexpected that it made her cry in a second. When Callan looked at Edith in that condition, he immediately began to blame himself, and the thought made him feel immediately sick, and he couldn't control himself because of the severe headache. His mother immediately noticed that something was wrong with him and started asking if he was all right, because he started holding his head, and it was obvious that he was getting worse. And after that, she offered to call a doctor because she was very worried about her son and didn't want him to get worse. But he refused to help and said he didn't need to call anyone, since it's just a normal headache and he just needs to rest for a bit, so it'll pass soon and there's no need to worry about him. He said the same thing to Lissy, who came in after the news that he was feeling sick, for she, like the Duchess, had begun to worry about him and offered to help him, but it was useless, for he was sure that it was not necessary, and that everything would soon go away without anyone's help. But for some reason after that, he started acting rather strange, and even stopped answering the questions that Lissy was asking him about his health, and instead started looking into her eyes, and thinking about how beautiful she was. He immediately wanted to touch her hand, but he didn't even warn her about it, and he didn't even say a single word at that moment. It was very strange of him, and surely the girl felt very uncomfortable after such a thing. Plus, there was one very interesting point that he may not have considered, and didn't notice how there was someone looking at them at the time, and could have misunderstood what was going on between Callan and Lissy at that moment. Unsurprisingly, he hadn't even thought about it at the time, and maybe he didn't care at all if anyone could see him now or not, though that was wrong, and maybe it was a big mistake, for it was his mother who saw it all, who probably didn't understand what it meant, for only a little while ago he had felt guilty about Edith, and even that had given him a headache, and now he was holding another girl's hand, and he didn't want to leave her. And after that, for some reason he suddenly changed his mind at some point, and said that he had to go. Lissy didn't understand how she should react to this, and what she should do in this situation, because he had just behaved in a way that was not quite nice to his wife, who's currently lying unconscious because of what looks like. It's hard to know what he was just doing all that for and whose side he's on, as suddenly, something strange began to happen to Edith, and it was as if she were in a dream, but it was something else. but as yet it was not clear what it was. The girl started to see herself as she was before. It was a girl with black hair, wearing a skirt and a shirt that was very different from who she was at the moment. But what could it mean? The girl began to ask herself where she was, and why it was so dark around. The events were getting more and more interesting, but it was getting very hard to guess what to expect next. And the most amazing thing was that she began to hear someone's voice and some kind of screen that said that until the exceptional conditions of the third stage were met, but she couldn't even begin to figure out what stage 3 meant or what was going on. She didn't know where she was and what was happening. It had never happened to her before, and she didn't know how to get out of it. The girl felt as if she were in another world and wanted to know what was wanted of her, and when she could go back again. She felt as if she were in the air, and some voice was speaking to her, like some kind of system, but what it was all for was a great mystery to her. She realized that it was just a dream, which frightened her a lot, because she was afraid that she would never be able to get out of there, because everything was too realistic. After that, the assistant immediately ran up to her and began to ask how the girl was feeling, because everyone was very worried about her, because it was unclear how long she would lie unconscious in such a state. But for the moment she did not care for it. She was too frightened, and at first she could not say anything. It took her a few minutes to realize what was happening, but then it became clear to her, and she began to remember that the last thing she remembered was a conversation with the Duchess, after which she was in such a state of, she will now have to rest all the time as advised by the doctor, and from now on she needs to forget about any stress or excitement, because now it's about her health, and that needs to be taken care of at least in the short term. In order not to make things worse, you need to temporarily rest as much as possible and not think about work. The first thing she really wanted to do was to drink a glass of water, and after such a confusing dream, she needed to analyze everything well and understand what it could mean. She was also thinking that it would be nice if Callan came to her now, to inquire about her condition, though after his strange and unequivocal interaction with Lissy yesterday, it was hard to know how he really felt about her now. When the girl first woke up in Edith's body, she realized that she had become the protagonist of a plot with a possessed evil female character, and decided that if she did good deeds with good intentions, she could change something and fix her fate. And she not only escapes a horrible fate and death like in other stories with villains, but also uncovers criminal acts and befriends the main characters. And most importantly, she hoped she could win the love and trust of one of the main male characters. Although after her next attempt failed, she decided to just live a quiet life and not change anything. But she was still sure it would be enough to give up her husband and live as a daughter-in-law in a rich family. However, regardless of her wishes, all events went on as they should, and any attempts to change everything were pointless, as if there were some unknown force that makes everything happen in a certain way. Edith can't unlock the hidden settings unless the exceptional conditions of the third stage are met. And this had been her chief misconception from the beginning. She had no power to change history, for neither Edith nor she are not the protagonists of this story. It is left to us to accept and follow our fate. Edith Triegelhoff, only a villain in the pages of the book, a minor character who is very rarely emphasized unlike all the other characters. She had a minor role as someone who is destined for a terrible fate, and her husband will be involved, and there was no escape from it. Unfortunately, she realized it, and knew that she was powerless in this situation, so it was almost impossible to change anything. The girl tried to just remember what to expect next, and accept everything that happens as something unchangeable. It was not hard, for she remembered very well the sequence of events that awaited her in the future, but for the moment her thoughts were all about figuring out what the strange dream meant, because the girl was terrified of it. Because she thought she was trapped forever and could never get out of it. So after that I couldn't sleep for a long time. So I decided to distract myself from these thoughts with something. And at some point she wanted to sneak into Callan's bedroom, who was asleep at the time, and didn't even realize that a girl was looking at him, who just wanted to see him again, and admire his beauty while he couldn't see it. Though if she had known about what he was doing while she was unconscious, she probably wouldn't have even wanted to see him at that moment. But as she didn't see it and doesn't know it, she wanted very much to see him, and there was a great opportunity to do it while he didn't see it, and wouldn't mind while he was asleep. Edith, every time she looked at him, did not understand how in one person could there be such good looks and a terrible character towards her at the very least. It's amazing that his bad attitude towards the girl didn't embarrass her, and she still wanted to look at him or be near him at every opportunity, which she actually did now while he was sleeping. The girl still hopes that someday they will live together happily, but first they will have to go through the inevitable trials and temporary difficulties, which she's sure will eventually work its way through, and they'll definitely be able to love each other for real someday. And she'll try to forget everything that happened in the past, when she thinks about it and dreams about it. She has the urge to kiss her and be near her, and unfortunately, or fortunately, it's very hard for her to control it, and it becomes almost impossible. So while there is an opportunity, of course, she decided to take advantage of it. But then there may not be another chance, because every day something new happens, and it is impossible to predict in what relationship they will remain at the end of the day. It turned out that she had said all this out loud, because she was sure that he could not hear anything, and was sound asleep. But it was not as she had imagined, and was sure. But it turned out that he had heard everything, and he was pretending to be asleep. And suddenly he took the girl's hand. Edith was sure that he was going to get angry and shout because she had snuck into his room without permission. But it was completely different. It turns out he didn't mind at all, and he took the girl's hand for a reason. He asked if Edith wanted to kiss him so badly that she was willing to do it while he was asleep, and then said that he himself didn't mind spending that time in a place as long as no one could see it. All this time, Callan had been hiding his desire to spend time alone with her like this. But for some reason he pretended to hate Edith, and at one point he just offers to lie on the bed and says she wanted it herself, and now she may not even try to change her mind or leave. He's determined to have a good time with her since she just wanted it herself, and thought he couldn't see it, so there's no going back. He just promised she'd love everything and be satisfied, and she might not even doubt it. But it was important for her to be reassured, and to discuss some things so that she didn't make mistakes and regret them later on. Edith wondered if he really wanted to do it, if he would blame her for something later, as he usually does. After that he thought about it, and began to analyze whether he was doing the right thing towards the girl he truly loves. And that girl is Lissy. So you need to make the right choice, so that there will be no trouble or any problems the next day. But at this point, Callan was sure he wasn't making any mistakes, and everything would be fine. So there was nothing to be afraid of. Besides, Edith is his wife, and he is entitled to anything as long as she agrees to it. So the guy said he had thought it over, understood exactly what was going on, and the girl didn't have to worry about anything, and could just trust him in that moment. And the most important thing is that you can never give up what you want, and they understood it perfectly well and stuck to it. And because of that, they can have a good time and not regret it, and not think about what other people might think about it, because they are husband and wife, so they can do whatever they think is right. In any case, no one has the right to punish them for it, as they are adults who are entitled to take responsibility for their own desires and actions. Except there was one very important moment. Callan had to decide who he really loved and who he wanted to be in a relationship with. But there was one very important point. Could he deceive Edith like that and still want a relationship with Lissy? He should have made up his mind a long time ago and decided for himself who he wanted, because there is less and less time to think about it, and she, in turn, is probably wrong to think that this man has changed or wants to get back together with her. It's impossible to imagine how she'd react if she saw him and Lissy talking yesterday. And what's happening now? She would never let that happen. She would probably hate to feel like a backup in case things didn't work out with another girl, or she turned him down. Either way, his act is horrible, and after this, he doesn't even deserve her attention. It turns out he's just taking advantage of the fact that she feels bad for him and thinks he can do this to her. But there's still a chance that she'll find out soon, and he'll never be able to disrespect her again, because he's obviously just pretending to treat her differently. And she, of course, believes it, and doesn't even realize what a terrible person he is, because he counts on being able to use her and manipulate her for his own gain, even though he's done it before. Although maybe at that point, he's just made up his mind and realizes exactly who he wants to be with. So he decides to do it, and lets her know that his feelings are genuine, and he's starting to try to make things right with her. As you'd expect, that night everything happened. But I wonder how they'll behave after that, and if from now on they'll start treating each other normally, and their relationship will move to a new phase. It is not clear what Callan thinks about it, but the girl is incredibly happy about what happened between them, and she woke up in a great mood. It was very clear to see how happy she is. She hoped that the guy wouldn't change his mind and tell her that she could leave now, because everything between them would remain as it was. And at night, it was a mistake they couldn't prevent. It was the worst thing that could happen. But the girl hoped that it wouldn't be like that, for it seemed to her that he was in earnest and incapable of such a terrible act. At which time he asked his assistant to prepare a bath for some reason, and to do it as soon as possible. But she was worried for nothing, and thought he might do that to her. On the contrary, he immediately asked how she was feeling, because it was really important to him. The girl had not heard such words from him for a very long time, because instead she expected to hear something completely different. But it was still nice to feel cared for by him. After that, Callan decided to carry her to the bathroom in his arms. By this act he surprised her very much. Edith did not even recognize him, because at that moment he was as if he was another person. But it was even better, and she tried to savor these moments while she had the opportunity to. Every second she could not believe that before her stood another man, who had corrected all his faults, and was now Edith's ideal man. When the girl was taking a bath, the guy decided to ask why she does it so often. Does she really like being in hot water that much, and it still doesn't bore her? It was hard for her to answer him at that moment, because she was afraid of what their relationship would be like next, and whether they had made the biggest mistake that night. And especially, more than anything else, she didn't want him to change his mind after a while and go back to being the man she was used to seeing before, because it wasn't just the time they spent together. It was the first time they'd ever done something like that. More than anything else, she wanted to know what Callan really thought of her, and whether he'd feel worse about her because he'd managed to talk her into it so easily. He even had thoughts that he had only done it out of pity, and he didn't really have any feelings for her. But how it really was, only he could know, and it wouldn't hurt to ask him about it, and not think about it anymore. And there was also the option that he did it because Lissy had gotten her relationship with her boyfriend after a long time, and now they're doing well, which was the reason Callan switched to Edith. And also, every time he talked to her, it was unusual for her to hear his kind voice that didn't have a bit of anger or aggression in it. So it was very hard to get used to it. It was still very hard for her to understand for what reason, and from what moment such a change had taken place. It was all quite unlike him, and seemed suspicious at times. These thoughts were making it harder and harder for her to understand what was going on, and to adequately analyze what was going on, as far as his behavior towards her lately was concerned. It turns out that she didn't have time to deal with one problem, but after that a second one appeared. But it was not so complicated and unpleasant. But it was still interesting to figure it all out. Could it have something to do with something she had had to see in a dream recently? And that was one of the stages of the, although she finds that very hard to believe, and it doesn't seem to have anything to do with it. It's still a mystery to her what it was, and how she should understand it, because it's so complicated that the girl still hasn't figured it out, and it seems that she won't do it soon. And the most amazing thing about it is that in the dream all that happened was not with the real Edith, but on the contrary, the girl was in her own body, in which she was before the rebirth. And that makes it very difficult, because it makes it even harder to figure out what it could mean. Even so, it would be best for her not to think about that for the time being, and to try to distract herself from all thoughts that might make her anxious or nervous during the period of recovery and recuperation. But it was not so easy, for it was impossible not to think about what seemed too strange and unknown. And yet it happened in a dream. It became obvious that it is possible to change her fate, but to do so, it is necessary to fulfill some steps, because without them it will be impossible. And with each successive fulfillment of one of the stages, the girl gets closer to being able to fulfill her goal and escape a terrible fate after all. But that doesn't mean it will be too easy. In any case, it will take time and a lot of effort, and the girl is completely unaware of any rules, information, and in addition, there are no clues to understand how everything works, or at least roughly understand what her options are. The fact that the information was catastrophically little. She was very frightened, because it turns out that now it will have to learn everything on their own, and learn from their own mistakes. And unfortunately, there is no other option. Just does not exist. And especially, It was a shame that in this situation she has to deal with it all alone. She has no mentor, or a person who could tell her something. Moreover, no one should know about it in any case. And it is necessary to stick to the image of a real villainess, so that no one would guess that there is another person in her body. And the saddest thing was that she didn't even have the option of finding someone to tell it to. Because after some fight or misunderstanding, this new friend could tell her secrets to everyone who should never know about it. Namely the whole family, from whom she tried to hide her secret all the time. And even after being charmed by Callan, she hasn't given up, and she hasn't forgotten that she has a secret that even he can't know. Which of course she doesn't have a problem with, and has never had a problem with. But still, one should not forget that it should always be controlled and not allowed to happen like that. Because just one mistake can ruin her fate. So you need to be very responsible about it, and do not allow to foolishly entrust someone with this information. After thinking that she is all alone in this situation, despite the fact that there are so many people around and she is with a huge family, despite all this, the girl can really only trust herself, especially after being framed and blamed for something she had nothing to do with. And yet despite all the difficulties she has to cope with, she has one single goal, which she must realize, no matter how hard it is to achieve, because her fate and future depend on it. So she wasn't going to give up, and all that was left was to look for options that could help her get closer to her dream, and deal with all the problems she faced in the villain's body. At least it was necessary to find out how Callan was supposed to behave in the next episode in order to decide how she should act in this or that situation. And it will be much easier to think ahead and calculate the next steps. After a few days, the moment came when it was possible to come to the Duchess and continue to talk to her about what last time it did not work out. After all, the girl really wants to learn some new information that can be useful to her, and it can be used for their own needs. The first thing the woman inquired about was, of course, the health and well-being of the girl. For last time everything happened so quickly that it was very hard to realize what it was. Edith immediately began to apologize for having frightened the Duchess, and because of her the woman was very nervous about the girl's health, and after that decided to rejoice, and told her that she felt much better, and it seemed to become clear what was the cause of what had happened last time. The Duke and Duchess had recently visited the Imperial Palace, and surely what they were talking about during that time was a topic that involved her father, so it was probably a bad idea to start talking to her about it. And afterwards the Duchess said that even the Duke was very worried about her, and couldn't understand what had caused the girl to become so suddenly very ill. But it was time to talk about what Edith would do now, for helping with the Duchess's work would probably be a bad idea, and in order to avoid making past mistakes, it was important to think of something different. And there was also one very important point. It would be better and more correct for Edith to do some work, because there are such rules, and to do nothing at all is also wrong. So you have to decide and think of what she will do from now on. In any case, a new type of activity can help to avoid such situations, when a girl may be suspected of something, if she will work with important documents. So it is ideal to do a job that will be less responsible, and because of it in the future, will not arise any such situations. But for some reason, the girl asked to be allowed to continue doing the same work she was doing before. And no one of course could assume that. You would think that this way the girl would be able to do lighter work and not burden herself too much. But she had just one request, which would make it easier for her to avoid being suspected of being involved in the situation again, and that was to have a person who would follow her and be able to prove her non-involvement in the future. There was one option, and that was the butler. But she doubted him most of all, because she suspected that he had set her up and created the situation that made her suspicious. So there's no way he's someone she can trust, because he's the kind of person who could be capable of setting her up again at some point. Therefore it had to be a man whom the girl did not yet know, and who would have no reason or advantage in making trouble for Edith. But still, sometimes the girl thought that the butler was the only one who did not hide his emotions and was sincere, so perhaps she suspected him for nothing, and he was a perfectly honest man. But that still had to be checked, and after all, he had been appointed as the person who would oversee her work, and it remained to be seen if that decision was a mistake. But still, the decision had already been made, and it was necessary to discuss with him everything concerning their further cooperation, Because if you do not do it, you can make too many mistakes, which then will be impossible to correct, and will have to bear responsibility for it. But it wasn't quite as the girl had imagined it. Her job had been upgraded a bit, and now she would be assisted. She would be obliged to do anything that might be useful to the butler. It was the only option the Duchess could offer her, in order to keep her morale normal, not to make her health worse by constant stress and trouble, which may make her worry and make her feel worse and worse each time she has to deal with something like this, which has happened recently. And not to waste time, the girl at once inquired what she could do for him, for she had already had enough experience, so it was not difficult for her to manage absolutely any work the butler offered her. Besides, in any case, what she'll be doing now is much easier than the work she was doing before, and it will be absolutely no problem for her to handle it all even faster than expected of her. The first thing she had to do was to sort out the receipts and put them in order, because a few years ago the person who was doing that job quit, and because he was dissatisfied with something, he just scattered them, and now they have to be put back together neatly. And for this, of course, he did not go unpunished. He got off easy for such an act, because such things are usually not forgiven to anyone. So he was very lucky, and he is still grateful for it. But there was something else that the girl could not expect from her new so-called boss. He was not kind at all, and directly said that she could not hope that she would not be able to take responsibility for her work, because for that she would be fired. So she should not expect any second chances, because she should be just as responsible to work as everyone else, except that ordinary people are afraid of dismissal, and she will have a fake dismissal. But still, it does not give her the right to be lazy and postpone things for later. And he also said a rather strange thing, which seriously made the girl think that he said that Edith would be sorry she had chosen to work with him. And also the butler warned her that the fact that they knew each other did not give her the right to treat him as a friend or a subordinate, for he was her boss at the moment, and asked her to remember that. Despite the fact that he tried to intimidate her, it did not affect her at all, and she was not going to give up her job. Besides, this new job does not require as much responsibility and effort as the previous one, and the butler is only trying to dissuade the girl from the decision in vain. He showed with all his appearance how dissatisfied he was with the fact that he had such an assistant. But the reason was still unknown, because there was no obvious reason to refuse it, because it was very strange to refuse a personal assistant to whom he could assign to do any task that he did not have time to do during his working hours. There were many more advantages than disadvantages to the idea. Edith still could not understand why he was against an assistant, for it would be much more convenient, and it would be possible to do his work more quickly. All the time she was engaged in her new work, it was very unusual for her to hear the sound of a pen scratching the paper, or to hear any other sound from the objects with which she was working. For the first time in a long time, Edith heard the rustle of paper as she turned it over, and it was something unusual and entirely new to her. Had she so quickly forgotten all that had seemed familiar in her former life? And also it was incredibly pleasant for her to be in that office, and to look at the beautiful sunset while she was working. It was the most pleasant moment for her at the end of the day, absolutely every time she noticed it. Because the atmosphere in the office is really special, she didn't have time to pay attention to it at all before. It could be because of stress or the amount of work, so there was no time to notice it, and even less time to admire such simple, but at the same time pleasant moments. And now she has the opportunity to be happy, even with such little things. It turns out that she hadn't noticed that her working hours were over, and it was time to rest. Surprisingly, she wasn't tired at all, and was even surprised at how good she felt at the end of the working day, unlike before. Besides, the girl managed to do the unbelievable. The butler assumed that she could handle the task in a few days, but she managed it in a few hours, and he was really grateful for the work she had done. It was a great surprise to him that his new assistant had handled all this much more quickly than he could have expected, and by this success, she had proved that she could be counted on, and would be able to help him in any situation he entrusted to her. And lastly, she had something to say to him, and a really important point to arrange beforehand, which she had actually done. Edith said that despite being Killian's fiancée, she would not demand any good treatment, as she was in the role of his assistant, and he could treat her as a subordinate while on the job. And it's because the girl realizes how friendly relations between the boss and the assistant can have a bad effect on the result of the work. And under no circumstances should there be any indulgences or anything like that. It should simply not be tolerated while working. Therefore, it is better to agree about it in advance, because she understands it and does not want to make such a mistake. After that, they said goodbye, for it was time to rest and prepare for the next day's work. After the girl left the office, she noticed her assistant, and she probably wanted to tell her how her first day at work had gone. But she still wondered what her new boss thought about it, because it was really important to her, and that would determine what their relationship would be like. And because she did his errands well today, there was a chance that he would treat her a little better, and not be as mean as he was in the beginning. Meanwhile, Callan and his brother had gathered for dinner and were discussing something important. Naturally, they didn't forget to discuss the subject of Edith's new job, and it was interesting how well she was handling it. And for some reason, everyone thought that she would never be able to do this kind of work, because she is used to doing nothing and is not capable of something serious. But they were wrong. All that's left is to hear her new boss's opinion, which they were eager to hear, and draw some conclusions.